Chapter 70. After returning home, David lay on the bed. He didn't even want to move a finger. Thinking about the abilities of Jeremy's trainer, David's heart was burning. He looked at the shadow attendant and manipulated the shadow attendant to fly to his side. As soon as he touched the shadow attendant, a warm energy poured into his body and entered his soul. He, who was originally dispirited, immediately recovered and fell into the comfortable feeling of his soul soaking in a hot spring. After David awoke from this comfortable feeling, he could clearly feel the changes in his surroundings. This kind of change would happen every time one's spirit was greatly improved. The smell around him became extremely rich. He could smell the mixture of various smells in the air and distinguish the various smells. This was something he had never felt before. If this was an ability, then this was an ability he had just mastered. At first, his spirit was improved, and it affected his vision. At that time, he saw the world with more colors, and everything was clearer. This time, his spirit was improved again, and it made his sense of smell more sensitive. He didn't know if this was inevitable or accidental. He couldn't mention this change to others. He asked the shadow attendant to open the attribute panel. He saw that his spirit was 373-1, which increased by 0.3 points. According to the previous calculation, Kaji's soul could increase his spirit by 0.1 points. The spirit increase provided by Jeremy was 3 times that of Kaji. He couldn't help but be shocked. If he knew the true strength of Jeremy in advance, would he have the courage to ambush such a powerful existence? At this time, he thought of the strange abilities of trainer Jeremy, from the sudden appearance of the white light armor to the white light shield, the terrifying two-handed heavy sword, the footwork that allowed him to dodge bullets, the danger prediction that allowed him to sense danger in advance to avoid bullets, and the last strange attack that almost killed him. These were all revealed by Jeremy. He believed that the other party should have some tricks that he hadn't used yet. At this time, David knew that he had hit the jackpot, but he didn't know what kind of jackpot it was. He felt like ants were crawling in his heart. He pressed one hand on the shadow attendant's body and felt the shadow attendant's body. An orange ball of knowledge floated alone in the illusory body of the shadow attendant. The moment David saw the orange ball of knowledge, the disappointment in his heart was like a bucket of cold water. Now that he had obtained yellow balls of knowledge many times, he didn't care about orange balls of knowledge. When he asked the shadow attendant to change the orange ball of knowledge into a display state, he saw the information of Spirit Pierce, 10% proficiency. David immediately thought of the silent attack that caused him so much pain that he almost wanted to die. That attack was like an invisible thorn that pierced into his soul. I hit the jackpot. He forgot the disappointment and was extremely excited. He hadn't fused with the knowledge light balls for a few days, so his soul and body could already fuse with the knowledge light balls. How could he wait any longer after witnessing such a unique mental attack ability? Fuse! He asked the shadow attendant to send the knowledge ball of Spirit Pierce, 10% proficiency, into his body. Strangely, this time he felt that the knowledge ball first evolved into a seed and entered his soul. This feeling was very difficult to describe, it was just a pure feeling. Just as he was about to take a closer look, an illusion appeared. A big hand pressed on the head of the body David was in. As before, David could feel everything in his body, but he was just an observer. A strange seed entered the body's soul with the big hand. This was very similar to the situation when the knowledge ball of Spirit Pierce, 10% proficiency, entered his body. Then he poured his spirit into the seed every day. This was also the first time David saw a way to manipulate the spirit. The seed slowly sprouted and grew. After an unknown period of time, the seed grew into a seedling. The seedling bred a strong spirit, and as time passed, this spirit became stronger and stronger. Until one day, the body emitted the spirit bred in the seedling, and the seedling suddenly withered. Then it was reinfused with spirit. Slowly, the seedling bred a new strong spirit again, and it once again had the ability to use spirit pierce. David woke up from the illusion. His eyes were full of doubts. This ability was called spirit pierce, but it could only rely on that seed. In other words, David couldn't teach this ability to others because without that seed, there would be no foundation for spirit pierce. It was also a strange ability, but as long as it could be used, it would be fine. He had personally experienced the horror of spirit pierce. He sat on the bed and began to feel the seed in his soul. If he didn't have the seed before, he wouldn't have been able to really feel his ethereal soul. Although the soul had always been in the body, most of the time it was the corresponding brain, not a real physical existence. This time was different. He felt a strange existence, and he knew in his heart that this was where his soul was. And in this strange existence there was a seed floating. This seed was exactly the same as the seed in the illusion. David suspected that after the shadow attendant absorbed Jeremy's soul, it forcibly extracted the seed that had turned into a seedling and transformed it into the original seed. It was just that this kind of thing couldn't be explained by science, so he could only rely on guesses at most. The spirit that he didn't know how to use before was like a cloud floating in his soul. David carefully guided his spirit into the seed. He didn't know if the seed itself was already full of energy and was about to germinate, or if it looked like a seed but was actually a seedling. Just after David guided his spirit into the seed sprouted and grew quickly. It didn't take as long as it did in the illusion. It didn't take long for a strong spirit to be born in the seedling. It was different from the cloud-like spirit. This spirit was like an arrow. David ended the practice with some joy. Before he could observe the changes in his soul, he felt a strong sense of sleepiness and fell asleep. Before he went to sleep, one thing he thought in his heart was that in the future, he must first finish practicing the 18 styles of body arts, and then practice the spirit piercing before going to sleep. In fact, the spirit piercing was not that simple. As a special secret skill, the only thing that was needed to practice it was a strong spirit. Because of this strict requirement, most people couldn't learn it. In addition, the spirit-piercing secret skill needed to be inherited by the predecessor of the spirit seed. Every time a spirit seed was passed down, it was a huge consumption of the inheritor's spirit. This also made the inheritor extremely cautious. The shadow attendant forcibly stripped the spirit seedling from Jeremy's soul and formed it into a seed. No inheritor would do this. This would completely cut off their own spirit-piercing practice, and it would also greatly damage their soul. David was able to breed a spirit-piercing so quickly thanks to the shadow attendant's operation. The next day at 6 o'clock, David woke up on time. He wasn't tired like the day before. Instead, he was full of energy. He knew that the best way to replenish his spirit was to have a good sleep. This was good news before he understood the spirit. He didn't have to spend too much of his spirit and affect his daily life. After he finished the 18 styles of body arts, he looked at his strength and constitution that still didn't have any changes. He felt the nature of the power in his body changing. He didn't know what kind of power would cause a qualitative change. He opened his identity bracelet and tried to contact Galen, but he realized that he couldn't contact him. In this situation, either Galen turned off his identity bracelet, or Galen left the monolith planet and went to space. Either way, it was impossible to get an answer from Galen. He looked at the map while eating the strengthened larva meat, looking for a place large enough to park the fire beacon. Maybe I should find a real estate agent and ask? After looking for a while, he gave up. Soon, he realized that professional things should be done by professionals. Chapter 71. When David returned to the living room and saw the alloy suitcase, he remembered that he was more concerned about the ability he got from Jeremy yesterday, so he just put the suitcase in the living room. Who knew that after fusing with the spirit-piercing ability, he would fall asleep, so he didn't check the items in the suitcase. He looked at the suitcase with a password and took the K2 military electronic detector. Although the password system on the suitcase was very advanced, it was only for non-professionals. As long as David had enough time, he could easily crack the password system. He didn't care much about the password system. Instead, he observed the 2 weak signals displayed on the K2 military electronic detector. It was a positioning signal device, and it was the kind that was hidden very well. If it wasn't for the K2 military electronic detector in his hand, it might have been missed. Although the password system had been cracked, David was not in a hurry to open it. Instead, he divided a part of his mind into the shadow attendant. The shadow attendant went through the alloy suitcase and entered it to check it bit by bit. This organization was too strange. He couldn't guarantee that other than the password system, they didn't have any other means that he didn't know about. The shadow attendant went in, and it was dark in front of him. However, through the shadow attendant's touch, he could feel that there were slender bottles fixed inside. However, after going through these bottles, the shadow attendant clearly felt that the thickness of the bottom of the suitcase was different. It was like there was something more. At the same time, the shadow attendant also felt a familiar energy wave. David felt this energy wave from those strange patterns. Of course, David couldn't feel this energy wave himself, only the shadow attendant could feel it. In other words, there was some kind of special protection inside the alloy suitcase. If the method of opening it was wrong, there would be unknown consequences. Following the energy wave, the shadow attendant also found an energy net wrapped around the alloy suitcase. This made David not dare to open the suitcase directly. He didn't know what was in those small bottles, but since it was so important, it certainly wasn't something ordinary. Although he couldn't open it directly, David had a way. The security of the alloy suitcase was very tight. First of all, it was almost impossible for ordinary people to break it open. Secondly, there was the password security system in the suitcase, which was technically guaranteed to be safe. In the end, it was this strange energy web that formed the ultimate protection. Now that David had deciphered the luggage's password security system, the alloy material was even thinner than paper in front of a level 2 longsword. David used his level 2 longsword to carefully cut open the bottom surface of the suitcase, while using the shadow attendant's senses to determine the range of energy fluctuations inside the suitcase. As the outermost alloy layer at the bottom was cut open, he saw the familiar strange pattern. At the same time, some of the patterns extended to the entire body of the luggage. Looking at these mysterious patterns, David always had a feeling that it was against science. He couldn't understand it, but the shadow attendant's perception was the clearest. She didn't need to look at the patterns that she couldn't understand at all. Just by looking at the flow of energy on the alloy suitcase, she could find the convergence point of the energy. At the bottom of the alloy suitcase, there was a complete mysterious pattern. David was a little hesitant. According to the shadow attendant's perception, this was the convergence point of all the energy. There was a high possibility that he could destroy the convergence point, and then he could break the energy web. However, he didn't understand the nature of the energy web. He didn't know if doing so would cause an explosion of energy and destroy the suitcase. However, if he didn't do so, he wouldn't be able to get the items in the suitcase. Not to mention, after a long time, the organization would most likely find him through the location of the signal. After looking around, he dragged the suitcase to the underground gym. There was alloy everywhere, so even if there was an accident, there wouldn't be much loss. He also believed that with the small amount of energy that the shadow attendant sensed, it could only destroy the items in the suitcase. It was impossible for it to cause any major damage. After making up his mind, David slashed at the pattern in the center of the energy web with his level 2 sword. He felt a trace of resistance from the energy web. The moment the blue sword cut through the pattern, the resistance disappeared. The shadow attendant's mind told him that the mysterious energy web on the suitcase had disappeared. David let out a long sigh of relief. He had successfully cracked the last security measure on the suitcase. In fact, the security measure on the suitcase wasn't that easy to crack. Even if the suitcase fell into the hands of other organizations, it was basically impossible to crack it. Everything else was easy to crack, but the energy web formed by the mysterious pattern was a very special security measure. It was different from the knowledge of the Interstellar Federation. Without the shadow attendant's ability to sense the energy web, it was very likely that they wouldn't even notice it. He thought that after the password was cracked, the suitcase would be opened, and everything inside would be destroyed by the explosion of energy. Even within the organization, only those with the corresponding key could open this alloy suitcase. David put his sword back into the scabbard and carefully opened the suitcase. The item that was so important to the organization was about to be completely revealed to him. In the open suitcase, he saw small bottles that looked like test tubes. They were densely packed with soft materials and filled the entire suitcase. He picked up a test tube and saw the milky white liquid inside. David realized that he couldn't recognize what it was at all. He shook his head. After spending so much effort, he didn't even know what it was used for. It was really frustrating. He counted the test tubes in the suitcase. There were 15 of them vertically and 30 horizontally. There were a total of 450 of them. He found a new suitcase and moved the 450 test tubes into the new suitcase along with the soft materials. He then used his level 2 longsword to cut the alloy suitcase into small pieces, destroying the 2 tracking chips as well. He then put them in a bag and handed them over to the AI butler, Emma. When the garbage truck arrived, Emma would hand them over to the garbage truck together with the trash in the house. David changed his clothes and went out with a relaxed body. This was the first time he went out during the day without any worries. He didn't have to worry about who would attack him. At least for a short period of time, no one would attack him. This caused him to have a rare smile on his face as he sat in the Gladstone Model 3. In the car, he opened his ID bracelet and connected to the city's news to see if there were any reports about what happened last night. Just as he thought, there was no one in the industrial area at night. The safety was all controlled by the security system. Although the battle last night was very loud, the sound was very weak after it spread out of the industrial area. Coupled with the sound from the industrial area, very few people would suspect anything. The battle last night seemed to have never happened in Perrin City. The Gladstone Model 3 stopped in front of a housing agency. David jumped out of the car and walked into the agency. "Sir, I'm Nellie. How can I help you?" A female employee with long blonde hair in uniform greeted with a smile. She wasn't affected by David's overly young face at all. Of course, a big reason for this was that David had gotten out of the car in front of the real estate agency and was seen by Nellie. No matter how old the Gladstone Model 3 was, it was still a Gladstone brand. At least this young man's family background was far better than ordinary people. David, who had lived 2 lives, still couldn't get used to the excessive enthusiasm of this mature woman. He wanted to pretend to be very experienced, but his slightly nervous expression betrayed him. Nellie smiled. This kind of business was easy to discuss with this kind of big boy. It didn't take much effort at all. "I need a standalone house with a big yard. It would be better if there's a large basement." David thought and proposed his request. "You only have a request for the yard and nothing else?" Nellie continued to ask with a smile. "Yes, I need something that can be done immediately. I don't have much time to wait," David replied. Chapter 72. The Gladstone Model 3 drove David and Nellie towards the east of the city. Nellie continuously introduced the benefits of the residence to David. David listened to her introduction. The residence was located between the middle of the city and the slums. The price of the residence there was not expensive. The most important thing was that it was large enough. The courtyard was at least 1,000 square meters, and there was also an underground space of 500 square meters. It could be said that if he followed these conditions, it would be very suitable for his need. Therefore, he brought Nellie to view the house. Only he, who had bought a house in his previous life, had some expectations for the house in his heart. As they approached the target on the map, David saw that the surroundings had become somewhat spacious. It was currently daytime, but there were very few people on the street. "Mr. David, it's right here." Nellie smiled as she led David to a large steel door as soon as she got out of the car. David sized up the place. It was very rare to see a house with a courtyard in the center of the city. That was because every inch of land there was worth an inch of gold. A courtyard was definitely an extremely luxurious choice. The courtyard walls were built with stones that were unique to this place, and were sufficiently sturdy. The door was made of ordinary steel, not reinforced synthetic steel. In terms of security, it was not even as secure as a stone wall. However, this did not matter. The speed of construction in this world was unimaginable. If necessary, as long as one was willing to spend credits, one could completely renovate this place from the inside out within a day. Nellie pressed lightly on her identity wristband, and the door automatically opened. She had the corresponding rights to visit this kind of residential property. As soon as they entered the door, they saw a large courtyard. There were also some rusty fitness equipment in the courtyard. It was probably left behind by the previous owner. The ground was also paved with stones. There were not even the most basic ornamental plants, making the courtyard look extremely spacious. "Mr. David, you can modify this place as you wish. With such a large environment, you can definitely build a landscape. You can place chairs for resting here. You can even place a swing here. You can dig a pond here, and set up a botanical garden here," Nellie explained to David as they walked. Even if David did not know much about this world, as a person who had lived 2 lives, he could hear the deception in Nellie's words. Was the pool so easy to fix? The entire parent city's water supply was supplied by the city's underground water. If one wanted to build a pool and ensure a constant supply of water, the credits required would be enough to buy another house, not to mention the botanical garden and landscape. All of these required a large amount of credits, and they were not things that a residence in this location would be equipped with. The underground space was completely empty. Other than some rubbish, there was nothing of value. The decorations in the 2-story house were also very ordinary. There was nothing praiseworthy about it, but according to Nellie, every part of the house was full of surprises. According to Nellie, as long as they added a little bit here and there, the house would become a perfect house. After looking around, David waved his hand and interrupted Nellie's words when he returned to the courtyard. "Miss Nellie, I want this house. How much is the lowest price?" "Mr. David, you said you want it?" Nellie's words were interrupted. She couldn't help but be stunned when she heard David's words. She asked in disbelief, "Is there a problem?" David looked at Nellie in confusion. "No, the lowest price is 90,000 credit. What do you think?" Nellie hurriedly shook her head and continued. "Go through the formalities immediately. I'll pay now." David nodded in agreement. He really didn't care about such a small amount of money. He didn't even need to use his secret account for this amount of money. His own savings were enough. The transfer of ownership was much simpler than David had imagined. Nellie drafted an application, and after David agreed, she submitted it to Skynet. It was currently working hours, and David believed that it would be approved in a short while. Hence, Nellie and David waited where they were. There was a contact request on David's identity bracelet. When the call connected, he heard Jim's voice. "David, I'm at your doorstep. Where are you?" "I bought a house in the east of the city. I just finished the handover procedures," David replied with a smile. He didn't hide anything. "Where are you? You didn't even inform me when you bought a house." "I'll go over now," Jim complained. David had no choice but to send his location to Jim. Jim immediately cut off the call. "Mr. David, do you have a friend coming over?" Nellie asked with a smile when she overheard David's call. As a real estate agent, she naturally wanted to form a good relationship with a high-quality client like David. Moreover, friends who could be with David would naturally be high-quality clients as well. Hence, she was very happy that David had a friend coming over. In less than 20 minutes, David, who was looking around the courtyard, heard a roaring sound coming from outside the door. It was the sound of Jim's military hover car. "David, why did you choose this location? Were you cheated?" Jim asked bluntly as he walked through the door and saw the scene in the courtyard. Nellie, who was about to go up and greet Jim, was almost angered to death when she heard this. "I'm just looking for a house with a courtyard. I still have some credits on hand for the other places. I'm planning to tear them all down and redecorate them," David explained with a smile. He knew Jim's personality well. "I really don't understand. Why did you buy a house here? If you want a house with a big courtyard, I can help you find one." Jim shook his head, indicating that he didn't understand David's thoughts. David didn't want to look for a house through Jim at all. He needed to hide his aircraft. It wasn't for living. He just needed to set up the security system. "Mr. David, the review has been approved. Let's complete the transaction." Nellie, who was at the side, saw that the application had been approved by Skynet. She didn't dare let Jim continue speaking like this. She hurriedly interrupted the conversation between the two and reminded them. David smiled at Jim. He then checked the information on Skynet. The application was approved by Skynet in just over half an hour. David couldn't help but marvel at the speed at which things were handled. After transferring 90,000 credits to Nellie, the ownership of this house was added to his identity bracelet. The transaction was completed in a short time. Nellie was obviously relieved. David couldn't help but feel a little strange. Someone actually dares to buy a house without giving us a heads up. 5 tall men walked in from the open door. The man in the lead had a mocking smile on his face as he spoke. When Nellie saw the newcomers, she hurriedly retreated to avoid them. "David, I'm dying of laughter. Didn't you inquire about the situation of this house before buying it?" Jim couldn't help but laugh as he spoke to David. As the second generation of Perrin City's top military force, why would Jim care about these people? Even with David's own strength, he wouldn't care about such things. What Jim was laughing at was David's behavior of directly conducting a large transaction without even asking about the situation. David glanced at Nellie, who didn't dare to look him in the eye. He then turned to Jim and replied helplessly, "How would I know? I just took a fancy to the space here. It's not bad. David, let me handle this. Who told me to owe you?" Jim said, waving his hand. "Who are you people? You sure talk big. Do you know?" Before the man in the lead could finish his words, he saw a short gun pointed at his nose. "According to the principle of inviolability of private property, you are trespassing on private property. Now, stand where you are. Don't give me any chance to misunderstand. I have 40 bullets in this gun. I'll fire all of them when I sense any danger," Jim said with a smile as he opened his identity bracelet to input information. The man who didn't finish his words felt a chill run down his spine. Jim was too casual, as if he didn't care about them at all. Because of this, the man felt that Jim was even more terrifying. The 5 of them stood where they were and didn't even dare to move a finger. "David, do you want the construction team to help you renovate? I still have some abandoned special steel. I can use it to reinforce this place." Jim stopped typing and raised his head to ask. "I have some requests here. Also, can your construction team handle the security system here?" David naturally wouldn't reject Jim's request. The construction team of the city defense has nothing to do every day. I asked them to come here for training. As long as they have the materials, you can tell them if you have any suggestions," Jim said with a smile. "They'll be here in 15 minutes. He quickly finished typing on his identity bracelet and said to David with a smile, Chapter 73. David, I still have 5,000 credits left from last time. I'll transfer it to you, Jim said hurriedly as he suddenly remembered the purpose of his visit. Forget it. Just treat it as payment for our next trip. David shook his head and refused. Okay, I'll remember it. Jim nodded in agreement. He was not the kind of person who cared about credit. How's De Quincy? David asked as he thought about De Quincy's injury. It's not a big deal, but he won't be able to go out for a while. Jim smiled and shook his head. He then continued, De Quincy has always wanted to thank you. Let's meet up when we have time. Okay, you guys pick a place then. David nodded in agreement. The 5 people at the side watched the 2 of them chatting as if there was no one else around. Although they really wanted to do something, they only saw that although Jim was chatting the whole time, his hand holding the gun was very stable, so they gave up on the idea. 15 minutes later, 3 military transport spaceships flew in from the sky. Jim, I'm not late, am I? A staff sergeant jumped down from the military transport spaceship and greeted Jim with a smile. Edgar, you already know the situation. Just treat it as training and renovate the courtyard. Use the extra batch of materials from my shooting range, Jim said as he put away his weapon and punched the staff sergeant with a smile. No problem. My men are too idle. I'll find something for them to do. Staff Sergeant Edgar nodded in agreement. He then patted the place where he was punched and said with a smile, Your strength hasn't improved. David, this is Edgar. If you have any requests, feel free to ask. Jim turned to David and introduced him. David saw the interaction between Jim and Staff Sergeant Edgar and knew that their relationship was very close. It was very likely that Staff Sergeant Edgar was First Lieutenant Eaton's loyal subordinate. Sergeant Edgar, sorry to trouble you, David said politely. David, you're Jim's friend, which means you're my friend too. You can just call me by my name. I'm an engineering soldier, so I don't follow the rules of fighters, Staff Sergeant Edgar said enthusiastically. David explained his idea. In fact, he didn't care about anything else. He only needed to reinforce this place and then open a 20-meter by 20-meter entrance to the basement in the courtyard, connecting to the basement below. 4 hours, Staff Sergeant Edgar said confidently after hearing the request. Edgar, transfer 2 heavy machine guns to David. Put it on the shooting gallery's account, Jim suggested. Jim, I'll pay the credits myself. You've helped enough. David immediately interrupted. David, you saved my life. I can help you get some weapons, but when you go to non-university, I won't be able to help you even if I wanted to, Jim said with a wave of his hand. At this time, 20 soldiers in engineering maintenance armor jumped down from the 3 military transport spaceships and started working without saying a word. The 5 intruders and Nellie were so shocked by this scene that their faces turned ashen. The 5 intruders didn't know what these soldiers would do to them, while Nellie was afraid that David would take revenge on her for hiding the situation of this house. They all knew that they couldn't afford to offend someone who could casually transfer the army. On planet Monolith, it was better to offend the police than the army. The police would reason with you and talk about the law, but the army would use war as an exception to deal with any problems. Hand over your ID bracelets and get lost. If there's any trouble in this house in the future, I'll look for you directly, Jim said in a deep voice as he looked at the 5 uneasy people. Yes, of course, of course. The 5 of them hurriedly handed over their ID bracelets and answered as they retreated. Jim didn't plan to do anything to them. He was just trying to scare them. It would be troublesome to deal with such small fries. Originally, he wanted to send a few soldiers from the City Defense Brigade to scare them, but David needed engineering soldiers, so he sent the engineering team over. It seemed that the results were just as good. Mr. David, can I leave now? Nellie asked with a trembling voice. She was no longer as eloquent as before. She was just trying her best to show her weakness so that David would feel pity for her. David didn't want to make things difficult for her. He waved his hand and sent her away. David, leave this to Edgar. Find a place to sit. Jim said softly to David when he saw that there was no one else. Is there anything else? David asked when he understood. Yes, it's about Lovell the venomous snake. Jim nodded and said softly. David got into Jim's military hover car and found a quiet drink shop nearby. He sat down and ordered 2 cups of natural fruit juice. David, Lovell the venomous snake confessed something. You need to be careful. Jim reminded him when he saw the waiter leave. David wasn't surprised that Lovell the venomous snake confessed. There were countless ways to make people confess once they fell into the hands of the military. Compared to the more civilized police, the military had fewer scruples when doing things. What's the news? David wasn't worried. He knew very well that he had killed the organization's biggest leader last night. He just wanted to know how much information the military had. Lovell the venomous snake belongs to an underground organization. At present, 25 crows belonging to this underground organization have been captured by the military. It's just that no one knows who the leader of this organization is. The members of the Blood Hand are all paid for their service. Jim told him what he knew. David couldn't help but click his tongue. He killed trainer Jeremy in one night, and the military caught 25 of Lovell's accomplices in one night. At the same time, they found out the forces behind them. The military's efficiency was so strong that it was terrifying. Will the military hand over the case to the police? David also wanted to know the outcome of this case, so he continued to ask. If it was still in the hands of the military, then the military would punish these people according to the war regulations. These people may be directly executed. If it was transferred to the police, then there would be a lot of trouble in the future. At least David, the person involved, would have to give a statement and a witness. They don't have a chance to transfer it to the police system. According to the news I heard, these crows actually used the opportunity of going in and out of the city defense to sell the city defense information to the leader of the Blood Hand organization. In essence, this is no longer a normal case, but a military espionage case. Jim said with a mocking smile. Selling the Interstellar Federation military's information in the war zone, these crows really dared to do anything for money. Although Perrin City was only a small city, all the information of the military was equally important. Anyone who dared to spy on the military's information was an enemy of the military. David, Lovell the venomous snake said that before you and I arrived at the south of the city, he received an urgent mission from the Blood Hand. The bottle of brain fluid that bewitched the brainworm was also given to him by the leader of the Blood Hand. It seems like someone has been monitoring you and wants to deal with you. You must be careful. The military will also dig deeper. Jim continued. The two stayed in the beverage store for a while before returning to their newly bought house. The house was completely different at this time. The courtyard walls were replaced with special steel walls. The door had an obvious military style. It should have been obtained from the military. After entering the door, David saw the entire courtyard that was made of special steel. The house was completely demolished and replaced with a military-style 2-story steel building. David obviously knew that this wasn't some abandoned special steel. Needless to say, a 2-story building that was built in such a short time was obtained from the military and directly pieced together. When Jim and David arrived, the construction was already finished. It had only been 3 hours, but the entire courtyard was empty. Jim, you must calculate the cost of this place for me. David looked at the courtyard in front of him and turned to Jim. The cost of this courtyard was definitely not low. Based on his contact with Jim, the cost was definitely not paid by the military, but by Jim himself. He didn't want to owe such a big favor. David, take care of the house yourself. I'm leaving first. Jim smiled and waved his hand before turning to leave. Chapter 74. David went to the first floor and found the security system. He did not need to hack it as he had full access to it. It was a set of military security system, including the 2 defensive heavy machine guns in the yard. As long as it was set up properly, it could choose to detect an unknown intruder, issue a warning, and then fire. Defensive heavy machine guns were 2 different concepts compared to heavy machine guns that could be used by individual soldiers. Defensive heavy machine guns were bigger and had a faster firing speed. For example, David's 2 heavy machine guns, which were each equipped with 20,000 bullets, would lose their ability to fight after a minute. However, within a minute, the 2 defensive heavy machine guns would fire 40,000 rounds of bullet. As long as it was not Kaji wearing exoskeleton armor, the 40,000 bullets would be enough to destroy any intruder. This was also a war zone like Parent City. If it were a peaceful planet, it would be impossible to install such weapons on civilian facilities. David took out his identity bracelet and opened the weapon column of his reserve combat personnel status. There were 2 additional heavy machine guns. Jim had always been steady in his work. He had taken care of everything properly. Of course, Jim dared to do this because the house was close to the slums. It was impossible to install such heavy machine guns in David's house in the city center. The security issue that David was most concerned about was no longer a concern under the protection of the military security system and the 2 heavy machine guns. He went to the yard, opened the interface of the military security system in his identity bracelet, and chose to open the underground passage. Then, in the center of the yard, 2 huge pieces of special steel were separated to the left and right, revealing a passage. At the end of the passage was the basement of the house. However, the actual basement space had long exceeded the specified size of the house. David quickly opened the property of the house and saw that the usable area of the basement had been doubled to 800 square meters. Power! David could not help but exclaim. Although Jim had spent a lot of money on this, if it were not for his father's identity as First Lieutenant Jim, he would not have been able to do all this so smoothly. Even if David were to spend double the amount of credits, he would not be able to accomplish this within a short time. When they arrived at the basement was also wrapped in special steel. This time, the consumption of special steel alone was a huge number. Of course, the value of special steel on the Monolith Star was not high because the Monolith Star produced its own steel. There was a sizable mine near Parent City, which was why steel was the first choice for most middle-class families. After reading this, David reinforced the military security system. This did not mean that his ability was stronger than the military security system. Instead, he connected the medium-sized server at home to the security system so that the military security system could borrow the computing power of the medium-sized server. Seeing that it was still early, he ordered an AI butler. After waiting for an hour, the AI butler arrived, costing him 5,000 credit. The sky gradually darkened. David hailed a public transport hover car and headed to the industrial area. Outside the garbage disposal factory, David carefully observed the situation inside. At this time, it was off work, and the inside was under the supervision of the security system. Along the way, every door in front of him would automatically open. When he arrived at the last warehouse, he used the K2 military electronic detector to check the history of the security photon computer. He realized that no one had entered this warehouse before. As he walked into the warehouse, he opened the floor excitedly, revealing the strange outer shell of the fire beacon. After passing the pendant to the shadow attendant, the fire beacon opened a passage to enter. Flying Fire, start the main engine. Prepare to take off. David ordered Flying Fire telepathically through the shadow attendant. Yes, Captain. Flying Fire's voice was heard in the fire beacon. Following that, the hull of the fire beacon trembled slightly, but there was no loud rumbling. It was as if all sound had been isolated. However, according to the data displayed on the front of the fire beacon, It had enough energy and could take off at any time. David used the K2 military electronic detector to open the roof of the warehouse. Then, like a soundless bat, the fire beacon flew through the roof of the warehouse and into the sky. This was David's first time flying alone. The hover cars before were less than 1 meter above the ground. He had only taken military transport spaceships when he was following the military. However, it was a completely different experience compared to his personal spaceship. David placed the K2 military electronic detector in front of him and paid attention to whether there were any external signals tracking the fire beacon. The facts proved that flying fire did not lie about the fire beacon's ability. The Skynet system protecting Monolith, including the parent city's own air defense system, did not detect the fire beacon. Under the cover of the night, David flew straight into the sky. Looking at parent city on the ground getting smaller and smaller, he did not immediately drive the fire beacon back to the shelter that he had built. Instead, he flew into the sky in the wilderness. David felt that the fire beacon should be called Black Phantom. Other than its special and eye-catching appearance, as long as it was not seen directly with the eyes in the dark, all kinds of scanning devices would not be able to detect the fire beacon at all. This was the perfect aircraft for infiltration. In fact, this aircraft was specially customized by trainer Jeremy for his own safety. It used the special technology of the organization and part of the military equipment of the Interstellar Federation. It could be said that once trainer Jeremy was discovered in the city, he could drive the fire beacon out of parent city at any time. Even if it was daytime and the distance of the naked eye was limited, as long as the fire beacon took off, the pursuers would not be able to find him. David flew in the sky happily and enjoyed the greatest joy of the galactic era. It was not until the identity bracelet reminded him that it was time to practice the 18 styles of the physical arts that he used the shadow attendant to control the fire beacon and fly to the shelter. When the fire beacon flew into the basement and David closed the basement, he realized that he had actually driven this strange spaceship back. He did not return to his original home. Instead, he practiced the 18 styles of the physical arts in his new home and rested. Jeremy is missing. Go to parent city and investigate. This time, Jeremy also went missing with a batch of holy water of eternal youth. That is a year's supply for the organization's intelligence network. Bring it back with all your might, the white figure ordered in a deep voice. This was a basement in Kia City. A tall man in a police uniform was standing in front of a pitch-black altar with his back bowed, listening to the orders of the white figure in the black fog on the altar. Kia City was a large city with a population of close to 50 million. At the same time, there were 5 large mining areas, 1 Krypton crystal mine, and many other small and medium-sized mining areas around the city. This allowed the population to remain high. Sir, is this batch of holy water of eternal youth still here? The man in the police uniform asked the most important question. He was very clear about the organization's process of transporting such special supplies. Once the supplies fell into the hands of others, they would self-destruct. I've used a secret technique to check. This batch of holy water of eternal youth is still here. I'm not sure if the other party did not open the box or if they had a way to open the box without damaging the items inside. I'll need you to investigate this, the white figure said with certainty. The man in the police uniform did not doubt it at all. Since the master had said so, then it must be true. At the same time, he also understood the importance of this mission. A batch of holy water of eternal youth was so important that it could affect the organization's control over all the important information points. Without this batch of holy water of eternal youth, some of the people who were bribed with holy water of eternal youth would lose control. However, it was not easy to obtain holy water of eternal youth. Even if the organization obtained it again, it would take a long time. In addition to the transportation process, It would take at least half a year for the next batch of holy water of eternal youth to be replenished. Therefore, finding holy water of eternal youth became the most important mission. At the same time, he knew that Jeremy was the Master's confidant. Jeremy's disappearance was not a small matter. Of course, he also knew the importance of this mission. The fact that the Master could risk his life to investigate the holy water of eternal youth, instead of investigating whether Jeremy was dead or alive, was enough to show who was more important. Every time the Master used this kind of investigation ability, he would have to pay the price with his life. Jeremy was not worth it. Chapter 75. Without the pressure of being watched all the time, David's physical training seemed to be more effective recently. He didn't know if it was a psychological factor or the effect of the 0.3 point of spirit. After many days of physical training, his body was getting heavier and heavier. This kind of weight was not reflected in the actual weight, but it was a feeling. It was a feeling of the integration of strength and body. Although his strength, physique, and agility did not change, he still felt that he was getting stronger day by day. On the night of January 25th, David's peaceful life was once again broken. The special code he left in the security system of Trainer Jeremy's house was triggered. The only trigger condition for this special code was that someone entered the basement. David didn't go into Trainer Jeremy's basement. It was too strange there. He didn't know if there would be any unexpected trouble. He got enough benefits, and he didn't want to be greedy. The entrance to Trainer Jeremy's basement was also hidden by mysterious patterns. Even if someone entered, they wouldn't find the basement. Now that someone had triggered the special code, it meant that someone had access to the basement, or someone from the organization came to investigate Trainer Jeremy's situation. An hour later, the security optical computer of the warehouse at the garbage treatment plant also sent a message to him. Someone had also gone to check it out. Unfortunately, the other party was very professional. Their whole body was wrapped in loose clothes, and their face was also covered by a hood. He couldn't even tell if they were a man or a woman. It was also this kind of clothing that made David even more certain that the other party came for Trainer Jeremy. David took out the 450 test tubes from the basement and sent them to the house he defined as a hidden place overnight. Although if someone had the authority to check his information, they would find the house under his name. However, the security system there was more powerful, and there were powerful defensive heavy machine guns. In addition, these test tubes were placed in the fire beacon. It was the safest place, he thought. In the next few days there were no waves. If David didn't receive a message from the two security systems, he would think that the organization didn't have time to respond. On the morning of the 29th of January, after David finished practicing the 18 styles of physical skills, he selected literature, mathematics, and general studies from his bracelet and began to read them. Since school was going to start tomorrow, he also needed to make some preparations. According to the notice from the school, there would be a mock exam at the beginning of school. This exam would determine the learning plan that the school would make for the students in the last half of the semester. Although it was the interstellar era, in terms of education, students were still gathered in schools, and teachers were teaching face-to-face. This was the consensus reached by the Interstellar Federation after countless years of practice and the most scientific proof. Humans had to experience how to get along with their own kind from a young age. This was even more important than the knowledge learned in school. Only after experiencing this would one be able to better integrate into society, whether it was working or becoming a soldier. Of course, it wasn't that there was no elite education, but it had nothing to do with David, who was from a small city. Even the second generation of small cities like Myron and Jim didn't have much to do with it. They didn't have enough talent in small cities, so they didn't have the opportunity to get an elite education. Getting into an university was the only way for them to get an elite education. Whether it was in terms of cultural knowledge or Kaji, it was the same. Graduating from a famous school would give them a lot of extra points, and they would become part of the elites in the future. David didn't have much ambition. He didn't want to become a politician, nor did he want to become a tycoon. He just wanted to have the ability to protect himself. David opened the door. It was only 9 o'clock. David was still trying to be a good student when Myron's call came. When David opened the door, he saw Myron standing in front of the door in his Federation uniform. "Myron, you didn't play until now last night, did you?" David looked at Myron's Federation uniform and couldn't help but make fun of him. Myron's clothes were too formal. This was something that was only worn for formal events. It was indeed strange to see it in the morning. "David, school starts tomorrow. There's a special event today. I invited you to go with me to broaden your horizons." Myron didn't mind David's teasing and said excitedly, "I'm not going. You go have fun." David hurriedly shook his head. He felt that this kind of Federation uniform was too restrictive. He didn't want to participate. "David, I took my father's card. This event is very rare, and my father just happened to be in a meeting. So we got lucky," Myron said with a mysterious smile. David was a little tempted. This was an event that only Mayor Bernard was qualified to participate in. This was the chance to get in touch with the most secretive side of the Federation. "Can you tell me what the event is first?" David asked. "The Titan Financial Group has brought a batch of top-grade goods to Raber City to hold an auction. Let's go have a look," Myron explained with a smile. David had heard of the Titan Financial Group a long time ago. It was one of the largest financial groups on the Monolith Star. It was involved in industries such as military, medicine, spaceships, and so on. It was also a well-known company that made exoskeleton armor. Its Titan Exoskeleton Armor series was the top exoskeleton armor on the Monolith Star. "Myron, the auction has nothing to do with us, right?" David was very tempted. However, it wasn't worth it to go to Raber City, which was 1,000 kilometers away, just for an auction like this. 1,000 kilometers wasn't far for a spaceship, but it was still dangerous. Especially for people like David who hadn't left Parent City. He was worried about the long journey. "My father asked me to bring some credits to help him buy something. Of course, this isn't just an auction. The Titan Financial Group also has some activities for us young people. If we win a big prize, there will be very good prizes. I heard that they even took out a Kaji weapon made by Titan as a prize," Myron proudly introduced. "Okay, but how do we get to Raber City?" David immediately agreed and asked. "Don't worry, the Sky Patroller is very safe," Myron replied with a smile. He then nudged David and said, "Hurry up and change into your suit. There's not much time left." David quickly changed into his suit. After thinking for a while, he put the scabbard on his back. "Forget it. Bring the sword. It's actually very safe this time." Myron wanted to say something, but he knew David's character and didn't try to persuade him. They arrived at the space station. With the invitation card in Myron's hand, the two directly went through the VIP passage and arrived at the waiting area. As soon as they arrived at the waiting area, they saw acquaintances. Jim waved his hand and called out, "David, Myron?" Daly was beside him. After a few days of getting to know each other, David also learned about Daly's identity. Daly's father was the captain of the Kaji Squadron, and his position in the City Defense Brigade was second only to Lieutenant Eaton. The father of De Quincy, who was injured last time, was Deputy Mayor Jasper. Deputy Mayor Jasper was another force of Perrin City's government. His connections in Perrin City were intertwined and had great influence. It was estimated that David's background was the weakest among these people. However, the genius he displayed and the potential relationship with Hans made his friends not dare to look down on him. After greeting each other, Myron looked at Jim and Daly and asked, "Are you two going to Raber City as well?" Haha, except for the items that the older generation paid special attention to, this kind of auction is basically for the younger generation to participate and use this opportunity to make some new friends, Jim explained with a smile. Myron, so you don't know much about this either. David looked at Myron helplessly. Myron was the one who brought him here, but even he didn't know the key point. David, the invitation card allows you to bring one person with you. I've confirmed this. Myron hurriedly shook the invitation card and explained. You're here too. De Quincey appeared in the waiting area in a white windbreaker and black riding boot. He greeted them with a smile as soon as he arrived. Humph! Myron snorted softly when he saw De Quincey. David, come with us. It'll be safer with you around. De Quincey ignored Myron and said enthusiastically to David. Jim and Daly looked at each other helplessly. With these two guys who didn't get along, this trip was going to be interesting. Chapter 76. When David boarded the aircraft, he was still worried. This mid-sized aircraft clearly wasn't equipped with any protective armor. No matter how he looked at it, it didn't feel safe at all. He was starting to regret his decision to put his life in the hands of such an aircraft. Don't worry, David. This is a sky patroller. It has an energy shield. Although it isn't equipped with any weapons, there's no need to worry about its safety. Jim explained with a smile when he saw David's expression. Don't worry. This is already the safest way to travel around the monolith star. Myron said. After boarding the sky patroller, David discovered that there weren't many seats. There were only 30 seats. In order to ensure the comfort of the seats, the spacing between each seat was wide enough. The energy shield takes up a lot of space, so there aren't many seats available. That's why the ticket price for the sky patroller is so high. Fortunately, with the invitation card, the tickets are all paid for by the Titan Financial Group. Jim explained. He was very familiar with the sky patroller. As David listened to Jim's explanation, he wondered what benefits the Titan Financial Group would gain from doing this. This kind of expenditure for an auction felt like a loss no matter how he looked at it. The sky patroller trembled slightly. Then, it tilted its head 90 degrees and flew straight into the sky. In that instant the seat tightened. David's body was wrapped up by the seat and pressed firmly against it. He looked at the others. They seemed to be used to this. After ascending for a full 2 minutes, the sky patroller finally began to level off. David, did you enjoy it? Myron asked with a smile. He wanted to see David's discomfort, but David's physique had long since surpassed his. If even he could endure this kind of pressure, how could David make a fool of himself? Does it take off like this every time? David's seat loosened. He calmed himself down and asked curiously. This kind of pressure wasn't something an ordinary person's body could endure. Suddenly, he remembered that ordinary people on the monolith star didn't have the right or authority to leave the city. Only those with sufficient authority could leave the city. Could this be one of the reasons? David himself didn't have the authority either. He only had the right to board the sky patroller because of the invitation card in Myron's hand. This was probably a form of protection for ordinary people. There's an air defense system in the sky above the city, so it's very safe. Take advantage of this to rush to an altitude of 15,000 meters. Insectoids rarely appear at this altitude, so it's relatively safe to fly. Myron explained softly. David nodded. The monolith star did not have any strong bug tribes. Even among the level 2 bug tribes there were very few that could fly that high. After entering the horizontal flight, some of the people in the cabin were sleeping, some were watching the video provided by the sky patroller, and some were chatting softly. Myron and De Quincey's seats were separated by David, Jim, and Daly, so there was no direct communication between the two, so they were quite harmonious on the sky patrol. Jim talked about his views on various firearms while Daly added on from the side. David listened curiously. As they chatted, the seat tightened again. This time, David was prepared. He relaxed his body and wrapped the seat more comfortably. The Sky Patrol flew straight down. David's body was strong enough, but his stomach was still churning. Damn it, it's like this every time just to be safe. The first to complain was Myron. His face was pale. Myron, shouldn't we prepare a vomiting bag for you next time? De Quincey mocked. He would not let go of such an opportunity. De Quincey, you! Myron glared fiercely at him. Jim hurriedly blocked their view with his body, preventing them from quarreling in the cabin. The Sky Patrol came to a steady stop, and only then did David relax. The feeling of being in the air was not good. He was not used to the feeling of helplessness when it came to his own safety. Walking down the Sky Patrol, David saw a space station much larger than Parent City. There were more than 10 Sky Patrollers alone. Walking out of the exit, David saw several hover cars parked outside the space station. These hover cars all had the same logo, the Titan Financial Group. Looks like there's no need to call for a car. Jim turned to the others and said with a smile. Arriving in front of a hover car, Jim took out his invitation card, and the hover car's door automatically opened. The 5 of them sat in the car. David discovered that the interior was very luxurious. There was enough space for 8 people to sit in at the same time, and the temperature inside was maintained at a comfortable 25 degrees. The hover car had no driver, and the driver's seat was empty. Only the screen beside the control panel was constantly flashing. Welcome, esteemed guest. Hover Car 32 is at your service. Our destination is the Titan Hotel. The hover car's AI system spoke in standard Federation language. The hover car began to drive out of the space station. At the same time, the freezer beside the hover car automatically opened. Esteemed guests, please choose your own beverage. The AI system spoke again. The Titan Financial Group is too considerate. Jim praised with a smile. He took a glass from the side and placed one in front of each person. Then, he took red wine and fruit juice. He poured red wine for himself and Daly, while he poured fruit juice for David, Myron, and De Quincey. It's a pity. You guys aren't old enough to drink such good wine. Only Daly and I can benefit from it, Jim said with a smile as he examined the wine bottle in his hand. David, Myron, and De Quincey were underage. It was fine if they secretly drank some red wine at home, but in an official car like this, they didn't dare to do anything forbidden by law. Soft music, wine, and fruit juice began to play in the car. The fatigue of riding in the Sky Patrol was greatly alleviated by the gentle music. When they got out of the hover car, David saw a sapphire-like hotel. The entire exterior of the hotel was covered in glass. It was different from the glass walls David had seen before. The glass here was blue, and its sparkling blue color made everyone who saw it sigh in amazement. The Titan Financial Group's logo also indicated where this place belonged. It's so beautiful. Myron sighed softly. Myron, be careful. The people we're about to meet are all elites from various cities. Jim reminded with a calm expression. Be careful not to embarrass Parent City. You'll be grounded when you get home. De Quincey chuckled. Take care of yourself, De Quincey. Myron retorted in a deep voice, but he stopped looking around, and his entire person became calm and steady. David followed behind them without much scruples. He wasn't some rich kid from the military, so he enjoyed the view all the way in. From the moment they entered the hotel lobby, they saw that almost everyone was young. The oldest here is no more than 30 years old. The older generation will only enter this place when the auction starts in the afternoon. Jim explained to David in a soft voice. Why would the Titan Financial Group organize such an event? David had noticed from the start that this event wasn't simple. Now that he saw so many young people gathered together, he couldn't help but ask. The Titan Financial Group wants to rope in and support some talent. They say it's an auction, but everyone knows why. The Titan Financial Group isn't the only one doing this. Other financial groups have similar events as well. Jim smiled and nodded to a friend beside him. There aren't any outstanding talents in Parent City this year. We've wasted our invitation cards. Daly said helplessly. You're the ones wasting it. I invited David here. Besides, aren't David and I also outstanding talents? Myron immediately objected. David is a genius. As for you, who knows? De Quincey jabbed. That's enough. Don't quarrel here, Jim said in a deep voice. He was the boss here, and his status wasn't low either. His words carried a lot of weight. He then turned to David and said, The Titan Financial Group's sponsorship is a very good choice. They don't have any special requirements. Once you've made some achievements, the Titan Financial Group can borrow your name. At the same time, you can help the Titan Financial Group when needed. David still had 40 million credits in his secret account. In addition to the 40% shares in the two hotels, he had no intention of accepting the financial group's sponsorship. Chapter 77. Isn't this Jim from Parent City? A 2-meter-tall bearded man mockingly greeted Jim when he saw him. He then looked at the number of people from Parent City and shook his head. It's such a waste to give the invitation card to you. It's better to give it to Arcejo City. People from Arcejo City can't even come, but you're wasting the invitation card. Bruno, wait until you've been admitted to Na'an University. You're not qualified to say that now, Jim replied with a gloomy face. David looked at Bruno's face, which was at least 27 or 28 years old. He couldn't help but turn his head and ask softly, Myron, is this guy also taking the exam with us? He used some tricks. He said he was taking a leave of absence due to illness. In fact, he's been accumulating and wants to be admitted to Na'an University directly. However, Na'an University has stricter admission standards for overage students. It's difficult for him to get in. Myron's voice was a little loud. He wasn't just answering David's question, but also mocking the other party. Other people are geniuses when they pass the exam. He's been delaying for 2 years. He's just a mediocre person. De Quincey was on the same side as Myron at this time and continued to mock. David could tell that although Bruno looked old, he was at most 19 or 20 years old. He just didn't take the exam because of Na'an University. Bruno's face turned red. There were a lot of people in the hall, no less than 100. His reputation would be ruined if he was mocked like this in this kind of situation. Arcejo City was very close to Parent City. The two cities always had some conflicts over minerals and resources. These conflicts were reflected in various aspects, and the young people from both sides were also a part of it. Bruno from Arcejo City, challenge Myron from Parent City. Bruno stared fiercely at Myron and shouted. It was Myron's fault for saying the worst. There's a challenge, come quickly. Bruno's shout alarmed many people. Everyone laughed and shouted. It was very lively and more people were called over. Before Myron could agree, it attracted the attention of most people in the hall. Aren't private fights prohibited here? David didn't know the rules and asked. Myron was also dumbfounded. This was his first time participating, so he didn't know the rules. It's only natural that there will be conflicts at a gathering of youngsters. The Titan Financial Group will provide the venue and send experts to act as arbitrators. There won't be any deaths, Jim explained softly. Myron's face tightened. He knew his own strength. Although he had been working hard recently, and his Warhammer mastery had reached the entry level, he still couldn't fight Bruno, who was 2 years older than him. One had to know that a battle was a competition of strength, speed, and physique. There was also the mastery of combat ability and experience. In terms of strength and speed, he was only slightly inferior to Blueno, but in other aspects, he was far behind. 2 years of experience was not that easy to erase. Are you afraid, Myron? Aren't you always so talkative? A guy who only dares to use his mouth. Bruno sneered loudly. At this time, he felt that he had regained the face he had just lost. Just as Myron was about to take a step forward, he was stopped by a hand. "Myron, I'll do it." It was David who stopped Myron. Myron had helped him so much, so it was only natural for him to step in. "I, David of Perrin City, accept the challenge." He looked at Bruno and said loudly. Bruno glanced at David, then glanced at the others in Perrin City, and said arrogantly, "Very well. Watch me destroy your Perrin City." However, Myron, Jim, Daly, and De Quincey's eyes were full of pity. No one knew better than them how terrifying David was. He had single-handedly wiped out 30 larvae with 2 swords. Interesting. The young people this year are very hot-tempered. A middle-aged man said with a smile. At the dining table next to the railing on the second floor, 2 people were sitting and drinking red wine. Young people should be hot-tempered. Without hot-tempered, how can they be impulsive? The other old man waved to the side and said, "Mr. Boone, what can I do for you?" A Kaji with a giant axe on his back and exoskeleton armor walked over and bowed to the old man. "Kaji Ives, please be the arbiter. Don't let them get hurt," Mr. Boone ordered with a smile. "Yes, Mr. Boone," Ives replied and then walked downstairs to the hall. "Boone, who do you have your eyes on? Why are you asking Ives to be the arbiter?" The middle-aged man looked curiously at both sides of the conflict. "Manson, I've lived long enough to see through many things. You're still lacking in this aspect," Boone said with a smile. "Boone, there are times when you're wrong. You haven't nurtured an outstanding talent for 10 years. The middle-aged man named Manson said in a deep voice with a hint of anger in his eyes. "Manson, you still have to temper your temper. Otherwise, you'll be at a disadvantage in the future," Boone said with a smile. He and Manson were both directors of the Titan Financial Group. They focused on finding talents for the group. Although he was the director and Manson was the deputy director, the two of them were still affected by who found the talent. "Are you two the ones who requested the challenge?" Ives' exoskeleton armor had a powerful deterrent force, and the voices in the hall immediately became quiet. He looked at Blueno and David and confirmed. "Yes." When Bruno saw that Kaji had been lured out to be the host, he couldn't help but feel happy. He didn't just take the initiative to pick a fight. This was just one of his methods. He had endured for 2 years just to get into non-university. How could he be so easily provoked? He had already heard that the directors of the Titan Financial Group had arrived early today. He needed to perform to attract their attention. The later he showed his strength, the harder it would be to attract attention. This was why he chose this method to suppress Perrin City. "Please choose your weapon," I've said in a deep voice. "I choose the heavy axe." Blueno was the first to choose. He then looked at David and said disdainfully, "Are you going to use the sword on your back? Only a weak person like you would choose to use a sword as a weapon for women." Bruno's words angered the women in the hall. There weren't many women in the hall, probably less than 30. But at this time, all of them were glaring at Bruno. If it weren't for Kaji, they would have already beaten him up. "Bruno, are you sure I'll use the long sword on my back?" David asked with a playful smile. "Since you're carrying a long sword, you should be good at using it. Use the long sword on your back." Bruno quickly nodded. He wasn't stupid. He chose the heavy axe. If David used a light weapon, it would be difficult for him to get close to him. Of course, he didn't think that David had strong swordsmanship. At this age, he had practiced the heavy axe for a few years longer than David. A staff member brought in a synthetic metal training axe. Bruno took it and waved it twice in his hand. He was very satisfied. Weapon selection complete. "Let's start the ring," I've said in a deep voice. But when he looked at Bruno, he looked as if he was looking at an idiot. With his eyes, he could clearly see that it was a long sword. The hilt made of special materials and the scabbard that sealed the long sword showed that the long sword on David's back was extraordinary. With his voice, a square ring that was 10 meters by 10 meters protruded upward in the middle of the hall. Ives' feet touched the ground gently. His figure flashed and appeared on the ring. He gestured to the two people below to hurry up. Bruno ran 2 steps and then did a beautiful somersault. With his strong body, such a light movement immediately attracted a burst of cheers. Of course, there were also a lot of women who were booing. With a light leap, David landed on the ring without wasting any of his energy. "You guys can fight. Don't worry about danger. I'll stop it before it happens," Ives said confidently. Even if he didn't use the exoskeleton armor, he could stop any attack from both sides. To be honest, in the face of a real battle like Kaji, these so-called young talents were actually children. Especially at Bruno's age, the real geniuses had already entered the top universities. As for the high school students who didn't go through the college entrance examination, Kaji who didn't receive university education, their combat ability was very limited. The most important thing was that they lacked combat experience. Chapter 78. David, you're so funny. Didn't anyone tell you that a sword user has no teammates on the battlefield? Bruno didn't attack immediately. Instead, he used words to break down David's morale. Swords are easier to carry. David replied with a serious expression. He had never fought with someone of the same age as him, but he was looking forward to a fierce battle. Your joke made me laugh, Bruno said with a laugh. He also realized that David wasn't the kind of person who would get emotional easily. Facing David, he was terrifyingly calm, so he lost interest in talking. Slash! Bruno stomped his foot hard, and then the strength passed from his legs to his waist, and then to his hands. He held the axe with both hands and drew an arc. The heavy axe broke through the air and slashed towards David. The attack was very sudden. A second ago, he was still laughing, and the next second, he was already slashing with all his strength. David, who was standing opposite him, felt extremely disappointed. Bruno's heavy axe mastery was at 70% proficiency, and he judged that it was at 10% proficiency at most. However, 70% proficiency in heavy axe mastery was one of the lowest among all his combat abilities. His long sword mastery was at 80% proficiency, which was on a completely different level from Bruno's. He lost hope in the battle. While disappointment appeared on his face, he gently touched his shoulder, and 2 glowing blue longswords appeared in his hands. Level 2 longswords. 2 of them. Just as the exclamations from below the ring sounded, the battle in the ring was already over. The blue light in David's left hand met the heavy axe and split it from the middle. When it reached the handle, David deliberately changed his direction and did not break Blueno's hands. He just stretched his left hand forward and the blue light stopped at Blueno's throat. At the same time, a steel arm grabbed the falling heavy axe, but it stopped beside the level 2 longsword. Fortunately, David stopped his sword. He wasn't prepared to kill someone in this kind of situation. He wasn't the kind of person who would kill for a small matter. At this moment, Ives felt a burning pain on his face. He had just said that he could fight to his heart's content and not worry about the danger. However, just now, he relied on the speed of the exoskeleton armor. Although he was able to stop David's attack in time, he still had to consider whether the arm of the exoskeleton armor could block a second-grade sword. If he were to be injured in such an occasion, he would become a big joke in the entire Titan financial group, and even in Kaji's circle. Ives let out a long sigh of relief. In his heart, he was also grateful to David for showing mercy. Otherwise, he would have lost all his face. You're breaking the rules. You're using a second-grade sword. Blueno's face turned pale with fright. Only after David withdrew his sword did he have the courage to speak. Bruno, you were the one who wanted me to use it. I've kept my promise, David said with a smile. Blueno was speechless. This was especially true for the spectators below. Most of them had mocking expressions on their faces. Most of them thought that Blueno had lost to David's second-grade sword. No matter how good an alloy axe was, it couldn't withstand the sharpness of a second-grade sword. Good swordsmanship. It's a pity that you didn't reveal your true strength in such a short time. Mr. Boone couldn't help but praise from the second floor. David had only used his left hand from beginning to end. However, Mr. Boone wasn't one of these youngsters. He had seen more. After the sword cut into the heavy axe, the easy and automatic change in direction, the straight thrust, and the precise control in the end showed that David's mastery of the sword had reached an extremely high level. "Boone, you're really lucky." Manson sighed as he shook his head. "Manson, this isn't luck. If you observe carefully, you can see the energy flowing through David's body. That's a sign that his strength attribute has changed. David must have a good teacher who can guide him to such a level at such a young age," Mr. Boone said with a smile. Manson didn't refute. This was Mr. Boone's experience. He listened carefully. Moreover, his gaze towards David grew even more intense. Based on David's youthful appearance and strength, he should still be a high school student. However, the transformation of one's strength attribute required one's physique and strength to reach the pinnacle simultaneously. Moreover, one couldn't overdose on strengthening potions. Normally, however, most people would reach the pinnacle of their strength before their physique reached the pinnacle. Under such circumstances, it was extremely easy to break through the bottleneck of one's strength. This was both a good and a bad thing. The good thing was that once one's strength broke through, one would possess the most basic strength of a Kaji. This was equivalent to taking one step into the realm of Kaji. As for the other aspects, as long as one went through a period of training, one could easily reach the same level of strength and become a true Kaji. However, the bad thing was that one would miss out on a crucial change in one's strength attribute. This change was related to one's future potential. It was precisely because of the rarity of such a change in strength attribute, as well as the enormous potential one had in the future, that the Titan Financial Group needed the support of such a genius. It's a pity that he's a longsword user. No matter how strong he is, he won't be able to achieve much on Battlestar. Mr. Boone shook his head and sighed. "Boone, if you don't want it, just give it to me. I don't mind." Manson smiled at Mr. Boone. "In your dreams." Mr. Boone waved his hand. Then, the two of them looked at each other and laughed. The stage below had already disappeared, and Ives had returned to the second floor. Bruno's expression was gloomy as he looked around at the people pointing at him. Although he wanted to leave, he couldn't. There were still events to come. If he left now, he would miss out on opportunities. For someone of his age, every opportunity was incomparably precious. "David, the next time someone challenges you, lend me your long sword." Myron looked at the scabbard on David's back and couldn't help but feel regret. If he had known earlier, he would have borrowed David's weapon. It wasn't as if he didn't know how to use a longsword. With a second-grade longsword in hand, defeating Bruno would be a piece of cake. "Myron, do you think that if there's a challenge later, everyone will know that second-grade longswords are forbidden?" De Quincey sneered. "David, ignore him. You did well. How can Bruno be so arrogant in front of me in the future?" Jim laughed as he patted David's arm. The few of them chatted and laughed. From time to time, people would come over to greet them. They were all young people. Under the premise that there were no grudges between them, everyone got along very well. David also discovered that this kind of gathering was actually quite good. Apart from Bruno, everyone else was very polite, and the atmosphere here was very good. At the very least, there wasn't so much scheming. Most of the young people either liked it or disliked it. Their good intentions and bad intentions were all displayed on their faces. "David, look over there." Jim came to David's side and softly signaled with his eyes. David looked over and saw a young man in a black handmade tuxedo surrounded by many men and women. It was obvious that this was a small group with that young man as the center. That's Hector from Raber City. He's in the same batch as you. His strength and speed have already met the basic requirements for Kaji. He'll definitely enter non-university this year and become your classmate. Jim introduced. David didn't know if Hector had used a strengthening potion to force a breakthrough, but based on Jim's attention, he didn't seem like someone without potential. That's Isaiah from Kaji City, and that's Doherty. They're all in the same batch as you, and they've all met the basic requirements for Kaji. It's very likely that they'll apply for Kaji's assessment before they enter the university. Jim continued to introduce. David looked at these outstanding geniuses. Every one of them was being sought after by many people. Strangely, he didn't feel envious at all. He didn't like the feeling of being sought after. David, don't be complacent. These are all even more outstanding geniuses. Jim's voice was very soft, but it was also very serious as he reminded him. Jim, I understand. David felt his concern and nodded heavily in response. David didn't feel that he was inferior to these geniuses. He had only been in this world for about a month, but he had increased his weight from 600 kilograms to almost 1,000 kilograms. At the same time, he had mastered many proficient and expert-level abilities. His magnificent list of abilities could make any genius feel gloomy. Chapter 79. Everyone, please be quiet. Kaji Ives said in a deep voice through the exoskeleton armor's loudspeaker. All the youngsters present stopped chatting and looked at Kaji Ives. The Titan Financial Group's auction will begin in 3 hours. As usual, there will be some activities before the auction to liven things up. Everyone is welcome to participate. Of course, the prizes will be generous. Kaji Ives said as he clapped his hands. A staff member carried out 3 exquisite wooden boxes and placed them on a table. These 3 boxes contain the exchange certificate for a Tier 1 weapon, the Titan Financial Group's Tier 3 funding contract, and the Financial Group's recommendation. These will help you get a better position when you enter the government, companies, or the military. Kaji Ives said as he pointed to the 3 wooden boxes on the table. His voice was very calm, but the young people present were excited. Jim, what's the Tier 3 funding contract? Myron asked softly. Myron, it's not for you or me. Only geniuses can enjoy it. Before becoming a Kaji, you'll receive 1 million credits a year. After becoming a Kaji, you'll receive 3 million credits a year until you turn 30. Jim said, shaking his head. David, this is not bad. Good luck. Myron said excitedly to David. I prefer the Tier 1 weapon exchange certificate. David did not fancy the Tier 3 funding contract. It was not worth it to tie himself to the Titan Financial Group for 1 million credit. Even the annual funding of 3 million credits did not catch his eye. He did not notice the confidence he exuded when he spoke. The youngsters beside him did not mind either. Everything seemed to be natural. If it were me, I'd choose the Financial Group's recommendation, Daly said softly. Jim nodded. He had the same idea. People like them, who were not considered geniuses, would choose to work if they had no hope of becoming a Kaji. A Financial Group's recommendation would be the best help. It would allow them to have a much higher starting point than others. Let's see what kind of event it is. It won't be easy to get the reward, De Quincey said in a deep voice. In fact, everyone here knew that these prizes weren't easy to obtain. Their chances were slim, and the only one with hope was David. Ives Kaji paused for a moment and let the young people present discuss for a few minutes before he coughed lightly. There are a total of 3 activities. The first one is to answer questions quickly. The questions are all about high school knowledge, and will not involve content above university level. The one with the highest correct rate in the allotted time will win. The second event was a squash game. In a 16-sided enclosed room, the longer one could return the ball without making a mistake, the higher the score. The first 3 rounds were a battle with me. The longer you lasted, the better your result. You may participate in 1 or more events at will, and the person with the highest score in each event will have the right to choose the prize. Of course, the order of selection will also be based on your performance. In this regard, the Titan Corporation is fair and impartial. Kaji Ives' voice stopped, and the surroundings became noisy again. Mr. Ives, if you use the exoskeleton armor, we won't even be able to take a hit from you, Hector said in a deep voice. As a prospective Kaji Ives, he naturally chose to fight for the prize, but this time, the difficulty was too high. I will only use 1/10 of my strength, and I will not use a grade weapon, Kaji Ives answered in a deep voice. Hector nodded, indicating that he understood. Mr. Ives, should we restrict the use of weapons? Otherwise, if someone uses a grade 2 weapon, they will have a huge advantage, Bruno said loudly. Bruno, weapons are part of one's strength. If you have the ability, get yourself a grade 2 weapon, Jim retorted before Kaji Ives could answer. However, no one supported him at this time. No one wanted David to use a grade 2 longsword, let alone 2. It was too much of an advantage. If Kaji Ives didn't use a grade 2 weapon, he would be greatly restricted in battle. To be fair, all weapons must be provided by the consortium. Kaji Ives waved his hand and decided. Good, that's fair. Many young people shouted. Jim, it's okay. I can fight without a grade 2 longsword, David said with a smile and patted Jim, who still wanted to say something. Yes, David, show them with a war hammer, Myron also said. I wish you all a good time. As Soldier Ives spoke, the arena once again rose from beneath him. A transparent room with 16 sides rose next to the hall. This was where the squash game would be held. The other quick quiz could be done directly with the identity bracelet, and only needed to connect to the quiz system. David was very curious about the squash game. He had squash in his previous life, but it wasn't as complicated as this. At this time, someone had already signed up for squash. It was a skinny young man, who was very confident in his reaction speed. After receiving a racket, he stood in the middle of the transparent room. A hole appeared on the ground, and a ball the size of a tennis ball shot out from it. The ball was very fast, and the angle of its trajectory was irregular. After the skinny young man hit the ball 5 times in a row with the racket in his hand, the ball's speed had obviously increased, allowing him to hit the ball with the side of the racket on the 6th time. This caused the ball's movement to become extremely strange. The ball bounced back, and he couldn't find the trajectory of the rebound. The 16 transparent rooms flashed red. The skinny young man walked out in disappointment. He was very dissatisfied with his result, but there was no second chance here. David, you haven't played squash before, right? Myron asked softly. No, there shouldn't be such an activity in school, right? David shook his head and said. Squash is only practiced in university. You don't usually go to high-end clubs, so of course you don't have the opportunity to play. Myron replied. This sport is really good. It should have a good effect on my reaction speed. David was very interested in this sport. When we get back, I'll take you to play. Unfortunately, you can't participate this time. I'm going to sign up. Watch me get a good result. Myron patted David's shoulder with a look of pity, but no matter how David looked at it, it didn't look like he was feeling pity. Instead, he looked like he was gloating. Ives and Kaji hadn't been challenged yet, but Hector seemed to be asking the staff about something. It seemed like he was choosing a weapon. David saw that there was nothing wrong, and directly connected to the quiz system with his identity bracelet. Talent wasn't just about strength. The reason why the Titan Financial Group included the quick quiz in the 3 activities was also to encourage knowledgeable talent. As for knowledgeable talents, if they chose a Level 3 sponsorship contract, some of the content would naturally be changed accordingly. This was also the importance of knowledgeable talent. In fact, among the young people in the hall, those who had an invitation card were a group of people with deep backgrounds in their respective cities. The young people who came with the invitation card were the elites of their respective cities. Through this method, almost all of the geniuses in a city could be attracted. Among the people in the hall, there were those who wanted to be like Kaji, and there were also those who had talent in cultural knowledge. The quiz system was very simple. All the questions were multiple-choice questions, and the correct answer was chosen from 5 items. However, the quiz system switched quickly, automatically switching to the next question in 5 seconds. Of course, if you were fast enough, you could take the initiative to switch to the next question. After opening the quiz system and reading the instructions, David entered the zone. He blocked out the noise around him, and his 373 spirit made his concentration extremely strong. When the first question appeared, he pondered for 3 seconds before answering, but then his speed became faster and faster. He was also constantly switching between questions. 5 seconds was too long for him. Jim saw that Myron's squash match was about to start. He was about to call David to watch when he saw David answering the questions at lightning speed. He couldn't help but pat his head. Was David a knowledgeable talent? David didn't look like he was answering the questions randomly. He looked around and decided not to watch the match. Instead, he chose to protect David from being disturbed. Chapter 80. David's speed was indeed abnormal. He felt that his academic results were only good, but in fact, with his proficiency in literature, 3% proficiency, mathematics, 5% proficiency, and general knowledge, 51% entry level, he was already one of the top students in high school. Of course, there was still a gap between 51% entry-level general knowledge, but in terms of basic knowledge, he was not bad at all. In literature, he had gathered the knowledge of 5 beginner-level students and above. In addition, he was not even a beginner, so his knowledge was much broader than the average student. No matter how hard a single student worked, it would be difficult for them to compare to the amount of knowledge that many students had gathered together. Mathematics was the fusion of knowledge of 4 entry-level students, and general knowledge was the fusion of knowledge of 2 entry-level students. Coupled with his high spirit, he had almost no hesitation when answering the questions, especially when these questions were multiple-choice questions that reflected the breadth of one's knowledge. This allowed David to have a correct rate that was beyond his knowledge. Originally, it should have taken more than 40 minutes to answer the questions, but he finished it in just over 20 minutes. "Jim, you didn't participate?" David asked when he saw Jim standing next to him. However, he soon understood why Jim was here, and he couldn't help but feel touched. "I just saw Bruno looking over here, and I was a little unwilling, so I stayed," Jim explained with a smile. David glanced at Bruno, who was secretly looking over here with an unfriendly gaze, and couldn't help but shake his head. With Bruno's personality, even if he suppressed it for 2 years, it would be extremely difficult for him to achieve anything. "How's the result?" Jim then asked. "I don't know. After submitting, I have to wait for the others to finish answering the questions," David replied. "Ives and Kaji's challenge is over. Do you want to participate?" Jim said as he pointed in the direction of the ring. "So fast." David looked in the direction of the ring. Sure enough, other than Ives and Kaji, there were no other challengers. The 3 quasi-Kaji have all gone up. The longest time didn't exceed 20 seconds. Compared to Ives Kaji, these quasi-Kaji are like children. Although Ives Kaji won't cause serious injuries, it won't be light either. Those without strength will be scared. Jim explained with a smile. "Jim, do you want to go up and give it a try?" David did not rush up to the ring, but turned his head and asked. "I don't need it. If we're allowed to use firearms, I can still hold on for a while, but—" Jim didn't finish his sentence, but David understood. David came to the staff and looked at the weapons that had been placed there. Someone had probably requested for them and left them here after using them. He was thinking about what weapon to use. His Warhammer mastery was only at 84% proficiency. It was far from his longsword mastery and spear mastery. He didn't know the results of the quiz contest. If he wanted to get the level 1 weapon exchange certificate, he would have to last a little longer in the ring. "Do you have a spear?" David asked the staff when he couldn't find a satisfactory weapon on the ground. "Please wait for a moment. I'll prepare it right away," the staff replied with a smile. He then whispered a few words through his ID bracelet. "David, are you choosing a weapon for the challenge?" Myron came to the side with a disappointed expression. He saw David standing beside a pile of weapons and couldn't help but ask, "Myron, didn't you say you were in a squash game? How come it's over?" David asked with a smile. "I made a mistake. I only hit 4 balls and made a mistake. The balls here are different from the ones I practiced," Myron said with certainty. "It's not the ball's problem. It's your problem," Jim said with a laugh. At this time, David's spear was brought up by the staff. David took the spear and felt it. Although it was a training spear, it was very similar to the spear he practiced with in the illusion, whether it was the weight or the feeling. He gripped the spear in his hand tightly. He was very satisfied with this alloy spear. "David, why don't you use your Warhammer first?" Myron exclaimed in surprise. David didn't know how to explain. Should he tell Myron that he had a 99% proficiency in spear mastery and only 84% proficiency in Warhammer mastery? "Myron, don't disturb David. He needs to focus before the battle," Jim said as he patted Myron lightly. David walked up the ring with the spear in his hand and stopped in front of Ives Kaji. "You are David. Your swordsmanship is very good. Why don't you choose a long sword? Although you are not allowed to use a second-grade longsword, you can choose an alloy longsword instead," Kaji Ives said with a smile. He was very optimistic about David. "It's okay. I am also good at using spears," David said calmly as he bowed respectfully and held the spear with both hands. As he prepared for the battle, his momentum immediately changed. Kaji Ives felt waves of murderous intent. He had only felt this kind of murderous intent from Kaji, who had killed many strong people. At this time, he felt it from David's student. He couldn't help but be cautious. Although he was in an invincible position with the protection of the exoskeleton armor, if he let David have the slightest advantage, he would lose face. "Kill!" David suddenly stabbed with the spear in his hand. The moment he stabbed, he shouted, but his shout was not as fast as the spear. Kaji Ives on the opposite side had a strange feeling. He saw David's mouth shouting, but before he could hear a sound, a spearhead had already arrived in front of him. Although the spearhead couldn't break the defense of the exoskeleton armor, in order to show the fairness of the battle, he couldn't rely on the defense of the exoskeleton armor. He didn't wear the exoskeleton armor for defense, but to make it easier for him to control himself in the battle and not hurt his opponent. When Kaji Ives wore the exoskeleton armor, there was a huge gap between his combat power and these young people's. This allowed him to control the power and speed of his attacks with ease. Fortunately, he was wearing the exoskeleton armor. When the spearhead suddenly stabbed in front of him, he only relied on his intuition, and the exoskeleton armor helped him to block. When he was blocking, he heard a slight sound from the chest of the exoskeleton armor. This meant that although he dodged most of the attacks, the spearhead still touched his chest armor. Too fast! He sighed in his heart. He didn't even have time to use the heavy axe in his hand. Of course, this was mainly because he was a little careless. Those pseudo-Kaji geniuses didn't even have the power to fight back in front of him, not to mention that David obviously used a long sword. Now that he changed to a spear, his combat power would definitely be greatly affected. But he didn't expect that David's spear mastery was more terrifying than his sword mastery. Kaji Ives' heavy axe was ready to start a counterattack, but as soon as he used his strength, David's second stab came again. The second stab's angle was very tricky. It happened to be the point where he used his strength, so he couldn't use his heavy axe. The only way was to retreat. This time, his retreat was smoother than before. This was the result of him starting to pay attention to David. Just as he retreated, David's pace synchronized with his, one step forward, restoring the distance between the two. At this moment, the spear retracted and stabbed at another point on Kaji Ives' body. Kaji Ives felt like he was going crazy. He had never felt like this before. Being attacked by a student without armor. In fact, this was a practice match. Kaji Ives needed to let the opponent attack first. But the problem was that David's spear mastery was as high as 99%, almost reaching the level of perfection. And any combat ability that reached the level of perfection would be called a master. Most Kaji Ives' lifetime practice was at the proficient level at best. Only a few could reach the proficient level, and most of them were beginner proficient. Those who wanted to reach the master level were even rarer than Kaji Ives. Kaji Ives himself was just beginner proficient. There was a huge gap between him and David's 99% spear mastery. Fortunately, David wasn't Kaji Ives and didn't wear an exoskeleton armor. Otherwise, Kaji Ives would have been assassinated by David. Chapter 81. Retreating, retreating, and constantly retreating. This was the same process from the beginning of the battle between David and Ives Kaji. From time to time, Kaji Ives wanted to attack with his heavy axe, but before he could do so, David's spear would force him to give up. Kaji Ives had to increase the distance he retreated. This was already cheating because he used the enhancement of the exoskeleton armor to be able to retreat a long distance under David's attack. However, David's thrusting movements were like a shadow. Even if his footsteps were constantly changing, every thrust of the spear was extremely accurate. Every thrust just happened to hit the most uncomfortable part of Kaji Ives. The size of the ring was limited. Kaji Ives could only control himself to walk in circles in the ring to ensure that he did not fall off. The battle on the ring also attracted the attention of everyone present. Even the guests of the previous generation who were chatting and laughing on the second floor stopped talking and watched the battle downstairs. When the battle is over, invite David up. I want to meet him. Mr. Boone waved his hand and called a staff member over. I didn't expect that a small city like Perrin City would have such a genius, Manson exclaimed. He can practice 2 weapons at the same time and reach the proficient level in both weapons. How can he be called a genius? He is simply a monster. Mr. Boone's eyes were filled with enthusiasm as he said with a smile. I'm afraid that your third-class sponsorship contract won't attract such a genius, Manson said in a deep voice. It doesn't matter. The 2 of us will jointly prepare a second-class sponsorship contract for him. If possible, I want to use a first-class sponsorship contract to keep him. Mr. Boone said firmly. I agree. Manson didn't want to compare himself with Mr. Boone at this time. Such a genius was discovered and discovered by them. Once David grew up, he would bring great benefits to them. At the same time, he also heard that Mr. Boone didn't want to monopolize David's recommendation. How is this possible? Myron's mouth was agape as he watched David continuously push back soldiers' Ives with his spear. His face was filled with disbelief as he muttered to himself. He had seen David learn Warhammer, and that kind of amazing talent was already a big blow to him. After that, David's sniping ability and swordsmanship had shocked him time and time again. This time, the shock he received was the sum of all the previous ones. He was facing the real Kaji, who was wearing an exoskeleton armor. Although there were various restrictions, The education he received since childhood made him know that Kaji wearing an exoskeleton armor was almost invincible. Jim, Daly, and De Quincey didn't fare much better than Myron. What kind of spear mastery was this? Stop, you've already surpassed all the challengers. Kaji Ives finally couldn't hold back anymore. He used the full power of the exoskeleton armor to grab David's spear and said in a deep voice, if he didn't make a move, he would make a fool of himself. David's spear didn't have a second move. Every strike was a forward thrust. However, it was precisely because of this extremely simple move that once he lost the initiative, he would be reduced to a passive state in every aspect. Kaji Ives was already mourning for David's future enemies. Such spear mastery would be the nightmare of every enemy. The spear in David's hand was forced to stop, and he had nowhere to vent his power. The power in his hand exploded, and the alloy spear made an ear-piercing sound. The spear bent slightly, and then rebounded into a straight line. He quickly let go, and the spear fell from his hand, trembling in Kaji Ives' iron hand. Thank you for your guidance, Mr. Ives. David thought Kaji Ives had been going easy on him and thanked him. David didn't really understand what 99% mastery meant. In fact, if he revealed this in front of Garen would definitely tell him to give up on all other weapons and focus on the spear. As long as he took one step further, he would become a spear master. A single Kaji master was terrifying. It was enough to match up to dozens of Kaji masters. Kaji Ives thought David was saving face for him and praised him with a smile. You're excellent. David hadn't even talked to the excited Myron and the others when a staff member came to his side. Mr. David, Mr. Boone, a director of the Titan Financial Group and the manager of this auction, would like to see you, the staff member said respectfully. David, you go first. This is a rare opportunity, Jim said with a smile. David, if you want to talk terms, remember to call De Quincey. He's an expert in this field. Myron seemed to have forgotten the grudge between him and De Quincey. I'm willing to help, De Quincey also expressed. David nodded with a smile. Under the envious gazes of many young people in the hall, he followed the staff member to the second floor. The atmosphere on the second floor was completely different from the hall. Elegant music played here, and the noise below couldn't reach the upper floors. On the other hand, one could observe the situation below at any time. On the second floor, there were dozens of people sitting there. These people were all middle-aged or older, and each of them had an extraordinary bearing. It could be seen that these people were definitely elite. The staff member led David to a table, bowed, and left. David, please take a seat, Mr. Boone said as he pointed to an empty seat beside him. He then introduced himself. I am Boone. This is my assistant, Manson. Mr. Boone, Mr. Manson, David greeted before taking a seat. The waiter delivered a glass of natural fruit juice. David just happened to be thirsty, so he didn't hesitate to take a sip. David, I invited you up here to ask if you are willing to accept the Titan Financial Group's funding? Manson asked directly when he saw that David wasn't nervous. David hesitated for a moment. He didn't care about the credits. He had already considered this point. In fact, if he hadn't heard that the Titan Financial Group designed and manufactured exoskeleton armors and high-grade weapons, he wouldn't have even thought of coming here. David, the Titan Financial Group is the largest financial group on planet Monolith. We have a huge network of connections on planet Monolith. We also have the ability to design exoskeleton armors independently. If you choose to accept our funding, you will have the opportunity to design your own exoskeleton armor. As you progress, you will also be able to purchase higher-grade weapons at a discount from the Titan Financial Group. Mr. Boone immediately explained the advantages of the Titan Financial Group when he saw David's hesitation. Mr. Boone, I would like to ask what I will get if I accept the funding, and what will I have to pay in return? David asked after some thought. Mr. Boone was overjoyed. Since David asked this question, he had already decided to accept the funding. David, you are a genius. Based on this, I am prepared to apply for secondary funding from the financial group. You will be provided with 2 million credits every year. After you become a Kaji, this number will rise to 5 million credits until you are 30 years old. You can also choose to accept the financial group's recommendation to take on any position you think is suitable for you. The financial group will use its connections to ensure that you get the most benefits, Mr. Boone said with a smile. He paused for a moment to let David digest his words until David showed an inquisitive look. As for what you will have to pay, first of all, the financial group will form a team to participate in some competitions. The secondary funding will require you to participate in large-scale competitions on Planet Monolith. You will participate in competitions of different levels according to your strength, such as Kaji versus Kaji, and so on. Secondly, the financial group will use your name to promote some product. Of course, they will inform you in advance and obtain your consent. Lastly, if you become strong in the future, the financial group can invite you to participate in some missions while paying a price that is commensurate with your strength. Of course, this can only be done once every 10 years, Mr. Boone continued to explain. David frowned when he heard this. He was very clear about his future. With the existence of the shadow attendant, he would definitely become stronger and stronger in the future. He did not care about the other conditions, but for the rest of his life, he would have to go on a mission for the Titan Financial Group once every 10 years. Although the price was commensurate with his strength, it was still very unpleasant. Mr. Boone, I need to think about it. I also need to discuss it with my family. David did not reject immediately. Instead, he said tactfully, "It's okay. We can add a contact number. When the time comes, I will visit you in Parent City," Mr. Boone said with a smile as he extended his hand. Chapter 82. David, what did the Titan Financial Group say? Myron asked as soon as he saw David. David, let's not talk here. We'll talk when we get back," Jim reminded them. Due to David's performance and the invitation from the Titan Financial Group, he had attracted a lot of attention. How boring. There are still people who haven't finished their questions. Why don't we go play squash? Myron suggested after looking around. Other than him, no one else had tried squash. Although Ives and Kaji's challenge had ended, the contestants were still taking part. Some of the contestants who hadn't participated in the quiz had also joined in. Myron, you hit 4 balls in a row. I'll beat you, De Quincey said faintly. De Quincey, that's because I didn't play well. If you really want to compete, let's go somewhere else, Myron shouted. Come, let's go play. Jim ignored the two and pulled David and Daly to their feet. The 5 of them walked towards the transparent room. When they arrived, the contestants had finished. Who's first? Myron asked. He didn't have a chance, so he was the most idle. I'll go first, Jim said as he walked towards the transparent room. Jim made a mistake on the 10th ball, but it was a good result. David could also see that this was probably the reason why Jim often used thermal weapons and had better dynamic vision. Then Daly made 9 mistakes, and De Quincey made 7. Although De Quincey only made 7, he looked at Myron with disdain. Myron couldn't do anything about it. David, it's your turn, Jim reminded him with a smile. David was about to step forward, but Myron stopped him. David, when you hit the ball, you must not look at the rebounding ball. Instead, you must look at the ball's impact surface in advance. That way you can react more quickly. Myron enthusiastically taught David how to play squash. David nodded. He hadn't thought about this before. He thought that he just had to follow the ball and play. He didn't expect there to be a technique involved. David, Myron's squash skills aren't high, but he's right. Of course, this isn't his conclusion. Every beginner's teacher would say the same thing when they play squash for the first time. Jim said with a smile. Jim, why do I feel uncomfortable when you talk to me? Myron smiled and pushed Jim. David entered the transparent room with a racket in his hand. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. The shadow attendant, who was not far away from him, flew above his head and looked at the transparent room from a bird's-eye view. He diverted some of his attention to the shadow attendant and focused the rest of his attention on the sphere that was about to appear at his feet. The ball appeared very suddenly and very quickly. In a flash of white light, it flew towards the transparent wall. David's mind was focused on the shadow servant, but he could see everything clearly. Under this kind of God's perspective, he could clearly see the trajectory of the ball. He also realized that the calculation and analysis skills he had learned from practicing sniping were also useful here. Without the influence of the wind, he didn't have to worry about the temperature and humidity. He only had to pay attention to the sphere's speed and angle. This was much simpler than his previous calculations. Of course, there was also his longsword mastery, which was as high as 80% proficiency. It allowed him to control the racket as accurately as his own arm. Longswords were light, cold weapons. They were good at speed and dexterity, which was perfect for this situation. After the first hit, the sphere flew out and bounced off another transparent wall. This time, David directly felt that the sphere's speed had increased a little. This should have something to do with the sphere and the transparent wall's material. However, he didn't know much about it, so he could only guess. He felt more and more like he was practicing swordsmanship. The sphere was the target of the sword. The most difficult part of playing squash in the 16-sided transparent room was the speed of the sphere. After every hit and every collision, the sphere's speed would increase a little. This made every hit more difficult than the previous one, which greatly tested the player's reflexes. The second aspect was the limitation of one's field of vision. A person's field of vision was limited to the area in front of them, while the sphere would randomly collide 360 degrees without any blind spots in the 16 transparent rooms. This would cause the sphere to leave one's field of vision if one was not careful. Of course, a real squash player could control the sphere's landing point for a short period of time. However, when the sphere's speed increased, they would lose the ability to control it accurately. Of course, David couldn't do that. However, he was practicing his swordsmanship. His eyes were above his head, looking at the situation in the 16-sided transparent room. David's first strike, or rather every strike, hit the sphere. Although he didn't necessarily hit the most ideal part of the racket and caused the sphere to fly out of its intended trajectory, with the shadow attendant's omniscient vision, he could still hit the sphere with his next strike. 7, 8, 9. Myron started counting after David hit the sphere 7 times. Then, the rest of the team started counting as well. David felt that he couldn't keep up with the speed. After the sphere's continuous collisions, it almost turned into a beam of light in the 16-sided, transparent room. At this time, he was relying entirely on his 80% mastery of the longsword. From time to time, the racket in his hand would make a sonic boom due to the excessive speed. However, after a few times, he finally made a mistake. He had reached his maximum speed, but the sphere was still accelerating. Failure was inevitable. He looked at the red light around him and thought to himself that he must find a place to practice squash when he got back. It was no wonder that the Titan Financial Group wanted to compete in squash. Not only did squash require quick reflexes, but it also required precise control of the racket, observation of the sphere, prediction of the flight trajectory, and so on. To achieve good results in squash, one's combat instincts must be very strong. Even if his current combat strength was lacking due to his lack of strength and speed, he still had a lot of potential. David, do you know how many balls you've hit? Myron yelled as he hugged David as soon as he came out. I didn't notice. David really didn't count. His mind was divided into two parts, so he didn't dare to be distracted, let alone count the number of balls he hit. 35 balls. Do you know? 35 balls. Myron shouted excitedly. Squash was very difficult, but it was a very high-level activity among the elite players, so many people played it. However, unless the player switched to a bigger and slower ball, anyone who hit more than 30 balls was considered a professional player. It was David's first time hitting 35 balls, which was a good result among the professional players. David, let's exchange our squash experiences when we get back, Jim said with bright eyes. David, even if you don't do anything else in the future, you can still make a lot of money playing professional squash, Daly exclaimed. De Quincey had just felt the thrill of beating Myron, but in front of a newbie like David, he didn't even have a trace of joy. They chatted and laughed as the quiz continued. David wanted to find a quiet place, but he found that wherever he went, people would come over to greet him and exchange contact numbers. After about an hour, the participants finished their quiz, and the hall became even livelier. Everyone, the fun before the auction is over. I will now announce the results, Kaji Ives said in a deep voice as he checked his ID bracelet. Everyone looked at him, and the hall quieted down. Although it was a fun event for the young people in the hall, it was a competition for the young people. It was much more important than the auction. Of course, some people looked at David. They all knew that David was the undisputed champion of Kaji Ives' challenge. He was able to suppress Kaji Ives and make him unable to fight back. If he wasn't the champion, then who was? Just as everyone was waiting for Kaji Ives' announcement, they saw Kaji Ives' face full of astonishment. Ahem, ahem. Kaji Ives coughed twice to hide his surprise, then said, "The champion of the challenge is David from Parent City." Chapter 83. No one was surprised when Kaji Ives announced that David had won first place. David's challenge to Kaji Ives had attracted everyone's attention. First place in the squash game. Kaji Ives paused for a moment, then looked at David and said in a deep voice, "David from Parent City won first place with 35 strokes." What? David again? How is this possible? I saw David playing squash from the side. I knew it immediately. There were only 3 rewards in total, but one person had obtained 2 of them. This made most people incomparably surprised. They looked at David with eyes full of envy. The minimum number of mistakes for a quick answer is 5. 2 contestants had the same score, but since it's called a quick answer, the fastest contestant will get extra point. So the result is David from Parent City with 5 mistakes and 23 minutes to answer the questions, Kaji Ives announced. Boom! Everyone in the hall could no longer maintain a quiet discussion. Everyone exclaimed in unison and then began to argue loudly. Everyone, although this is just a pre-auction event, the Titan Financial Group adheres to the principle of fairness and openness. You can check all the results on your ID bracelet. If you have any questions, you can ask the staff for help. Kaji Ives increased the loudspeaker on his exoskeleton armor, suppressing the noise in the hall. After he finished speaking, he ignored the voices in the hall and went straight to David's side. "David, come with me," Kaji Ives said to David. "Okay, Mr. Ives." David knew why they were looking for him. He didn't want to stay here and be surrounded by a group of people. This feeling was very uncomfortable. He regretted going all out. In fact, after challenging Kaji Ives, he didn't need to participate in the other 2 activities at all. When he had participated in the quick quiz contest, he had no intention of winning. He had only wanted to see how well he had grasped the cultural knowledge. And it was his first time playing squash. Who knew that he would score so well on his first try? David gestured to his friends and followed Ives and Kaji up to the 2nd floor. When he reached the 2nd floor, the noise in the hall was cut off, and his ears finally quieted down. "David, where did you learn your spear from?" Kaji Ives asked casually. "Mr. Ives, my teacher's name is Galen." David was telling the truth. His teacher was indeed Galen. As for whether it was Galen who taught him how to use the spear, he did not give a clear answer. "Lord Galen." Kaji Ives' eyes flashed with surprise. He whispered to himself and didn't ask David any more questions. In fact, Kaji Ives had checked David's situation through the internal intelligence of the Titan Financial Group. He knew that David's father, Hans, was a nation knight. He also knew that Galen had taught David for a while. However, Kaji Ives didn't believe that Galen could teach a spear master. But since David didn't want to say more, he didn't ask any more. "David, we meet again. I didn't expect you to win first place in all 3 activities." When Mr. Boone saw David, his smile was even brighter than before. Combat talent and knowledge talent were both important, but when both appeared in the same person, he had to pay more attention. Originally, the financial group only used the 3 prizes to encourage the young people to participate in the 3 activities to select the 3 best youths in all aspects. However, these 3 prizes were nothing to David now. David had 2 second-grade longswords, so the first-grade weapon exchange certificate was much less attractive to him. As for the third-grade sponsorship contract, Mr. Boone had just mentioned the second-grade sponsorship contract, so the third-grade sponsorship contract was even more useless. As for the recommendation qualification, a genius like David didn't need the Titan Financial Group's recommendation. Not to mention the relationship between Galen and David's father, Hans, was a nation knight. According to the intelligence, Hans wanted to pass the title of nation knight to David, and Hans didn't use the only right to choose a position. That right was more useful than the Titan Financial Group's recommendation. "I was just lucky," David said honestly. "David, you are too modest." Mr. Boone shook his head and said, "I want to hear your opinion about the prizes." "Mr. Boone, I don't need the other 2 prizes. I only want the first-grade weapon exchange certificate to exchange for a first-grade weapon." David thought that the 3 prizes he received made things difficult for Mr. Boone, so he immediately said, No, that's not what I meant. The 3 prizes are all yours. You deserve it. I know these prizes aren't very useful to you, so I want to ask your opinion. However, since you want to exchange for a first-grade weapon, then let's talk about this first." Mr. Boone waved his hand and said, "I want to use the first-grade weapon exchange certificate to exchange for the Kaji sniper rifle." David didn't hesitate and immediately made the request he had long thought of. "David, you have a sniping talent?" Mr. Boone was stunned and asked. David didn't say anything. He looked at Mr. Boone and waited for his decision. "David, the Kaji sniper rifle is very special. You can only obtain it after becoming a sniper Kaji. The value of the Kaji sniper rifle far exceeds that of a first-grade weapon," Mr. Boone explained awkwardly. Due to the terrifying power of the soldier's sniper rifle, in addition to the huge damage it would cause to the body, there was a strict process to obtain the soldier's sniper rifle in order to prevent accidents and to prevent this kind of weapon with great lethality from being leaked out. If a sniper Kaji wanted to obtain the Kaji sniper rifle, the biggest chance would be after the first sniper Kaji test. There would be a chance to purchase it. If a sniper Kaji didn't succeed, then he would give up this opportunity. This was because this was the majority of sniper Kaji chances to obtain the Kaji sniper rifle. In the future, if he wanted to obtain a Kaji sniper rifle or exchange for a better Kaji sniper rifle, he would have to join the army or a large organization to obtain a new Kaji sniper rifle. Even Mr. Boone didn't have the right to give the Kaji sniper rifle to David. This was a violation of the rules. "Then I'll choose a first-grade spear." David was extremely disappointed. Although he had the Death's Eye replica and even replicated it in the virtual environment of a medium-sized server, he had never seen it in real life, let alone possess it. "David, this is our lack of consideration. We didn't think of this possibility. "I'm sorry to disappoint you," Mr. Boone said apologetically. Then he thought for a moment and asked, "How about this? I can make the decision to exchange the 3 rewards for a second-grade spear. Do you agree?" David was stunned. He didn't expect such a good thing to happen. The 3 rewards sounded good, but in fact, they were the Titan Financial Group's means of buying talent. The Titan Financial Group was able to do such a large business on planet Monolith and survive despite being surrounded by many enemies. It was because of this talent strategy. They constantly looked for talents and invested in them. After these talents grew up, the Titan Financial Group would have a large number of allies in all aspects. In times of crisis, they would also receive a large number of powerhouses to help them. Of course, this talent strategy wasn't unique to the Titan Financial Group. Every financial group had such a plan. It was just that their investments were different. Although the second-grade spear was extremely valuable, Mr. Boone was very optimistic about David. From the potential that David had shown, to his comprehensive ability, and the high possibility that David would become a national knight in the future. Although he would only be a second-generation national knight, he would definitely have a lot of power. This was a huge temptation for the Titan Financial Group. In particular, David's lack of interest in the funding plan made Mr. Boone want to rope in David through other means. "I agree." David nodded heavily. How could he not agree to such a condition? "Manson, withdraw the 5th auction item. That item has a new owner." Mr. Boone turned to Manson and said, Chapter 84. Throughout the entire auction, David could not concentrate. There was a quaint box beside him. It was the level 2 spear. That was the main reason why he could not concentrate. He opened the box and glanced at it. The box was divided into 4 cylinders that were emitting a faint blue glow and a spearhead with a blood groove. He did not have the chance to take it out and assemble it into a complete spear. He did not understand most of the items in the auction. He only knew that each item was very valuable. The cheapest item was worth hundreds of thousands of credits, while the most valuable item was sold for over 100 million credit. Until the auction was about to end, the few people from Parent City did not manage to get any items. On one hand, it was because of the price. On the other hand, it was because of the box beside David. When they heard that the 3 items were exchanged for a level 2 spear, they were extremely envious. Unlike a level 2 longsword, a level 2 spear was a heavy weapon. The materials used to make it were many times more than a level 2 longsword. More importantly, there were more Kaji who used spears than Kaji who used longswords. Therefore, a level 2 spear was naturally more valuable than a level 2 longsword. Although David did not know the exact value of a level 2 spear, he knew that this level 2 spear was ranked 5th in the auction. It was obvious how valuable it was. With such a treasure beside him, the few people from Parent City kept looking at the box. How could they possibly concentrate on the auction? The next item is also the last item of this auction. It's the unaging holy water from the great world of God. Of course, the mercenary who obtained the unaging holy water was severely injured after obtaining it. He consumed half of the unaging holy water. There's only half a bottle of the unaging holy water left. The old auctioneer opened a box and revealed the long, thin bottle that was fixed in place. He introduced it to the people present. The entire auction hall was silent. Even the sound of breathing was much lighter. After a while, a middle-aged guest shook his head and said regretfully, "Why is there only half a bottle? I wonder how much of the potency is left. If it's an entire bottle of ageless holy water, do you think it would be our turn?" Another guest who participated in the auction said helplessly. Of course, the eyes of many of the auction guests flashed with a shocking light. Their eyes were filled with determination. David, on the other hand, felt dizzy because he saw the eternal holy water emitting a milky white light in the slender bottle. It was exactly the same as the liquid in the 450 bottles of test tubes he obtained. Just half a bottle of undying holy water was enough to make these elites so nervous. He could almost imagine how big of a problem the 450 bottles of undying holy water would be. Perhaps some of you still don't know what the undying holy water is. I'll take some time to explain it to you. The old auctioneer was not in a hurry to start the auction. He knew very well how to mobilize the crowd. There were many young people here. These young people were not the main force of the auction, but they could use the explanation of the undying holy water to stimulate the desire of the guests who were participating in the auction. The undying holy water is a product of the mysterious great world of God. No one knows how it's made, but its effect is enough to make anyone's heart beat faster. The undying holy water can restore the body of an old man to its middle-aged state and heal the body of a severely injured person quickly. It's worthy of the title of holy water. Legend has it that as long as you have enough undying holy water, you can extend your life and become truly immortal. The old auctioneer became more and more excited as he spoke. When he looked at the undying holy water, he even had the urge to drink it in one gulp. Many of the guests already knew about this, but when it was mentioned again, they looked at the undying holy water with even more enthusiasm. The starting price of the auction is 5 million credits. The old auctioneer did not wait any longer and said directly. Almost immediately, there were guests who kept increasing the price. It only took a minute to raise the price from 5 million credits to 20 million credit. When the price reached 20 million credits, everyone's increase in price was much more rational. They were increasing the price by 10,000 credit. We don't even know the effects of half a bottle of undying holy water. Why is the price so high? A guest sitting near David softly muttered to himself. It was probably someone who did not have enough credits and was kicked out early on. When it came to lifespan, even if there was only a slight possibility, these elites would lose their usual wisdom. This was especially true for the elderly here. To them, wealth was more than enough. Exchanging wealth for lifespan and youth was worth it. David wanted to calculate the value of the 450 bottles of undying holy water. Based on the current value of half a bottle, the undying holy water in his box was worth 9 billion credit. When he thought of 9 billion credits, David felt dizzy again. However, his rationality told him that if he dared to leak even a little bit of information about the undying holy water, what awaited him would be endless pursuit. Before he knew the value of the 450 bottles of undying holy water, although he had paid extra attention to the value of the test tubes in the box, he had never thought that it would be so shockingly valuable. If the organization lost such a huge amount of wealth, the consequences would be obvious. The organization would definitely not let it go. Jeremy, who had been killed by David, was only the leader of a small city. However, he had relied on his body to withstand David's sniper attack. If he had not been lucky, he would have been killed on the spot. If Trainer Jeremy died, then the people sent by the organization would naturally be stronger than Trainer Jeremy. David thought of the security system that had been triggered. He knew that the crisis was in Perrin City. In the end, the auction price reached a sky-high 1 million credits. David did not even bother to calculate the difference between the 450 bottles of undying holy water and the current price. When they returned, the Titan Financial Group still sent a hover car to send them to the space station. However, this time, the hover car was a grade higher than the previous one. This showed how much importance the Titan Financial Group placed on David. Once again, they felt like they had soared into the sky and swooped down. On the Sky Patroller, no one mentioned the box. When they arrived at Perrin City and boarded the hover car, they could no longer hold back. "David, show us the Tier 2 spear," Myron said anxiously. David smiled and did not refuse. He had to thank Myron for this. If not for him, he would not have had such a good opportunity to obtain a Tier 2 spear. Shifeng opened the long box and handed it to Myron. Look at the color, the light. It's beautiful. Myron took out a section of a cylinder and caressed it with both hands. He looked at it as if he were looking at a lover, and David could not help but shudder. Jim, Daly, and De Quincey did not stand on ceremony. They each took a section of the cylinder and examined it carefully. Parent City did have Tier 2 weapons, but even the rich and powerful didn't have the opportunity to hold one in their hands. Don't take out the spearhead in the hover car, Myron. You'll destroy the car. Jim warned when he saw Myron reaching for the spearhead in the box. Since they did not want to be too far away from the Tier 2 spear, they all sat in Jim's military hover car. However, even if it was a military hover car, it would not be able to withstand the attack of a second-grade spearhead. David, why didn't you choose the Warhammer? Myron put down the spearhead and said unwillingly. Myron, this is David's reward. What he chooses has nothing to do with you. De Quincey said softly. De Quincey, with my friendship with David, if he chooses a second-grade Warhammer, then I'll be able to use a second-grade Warhammer to practice. Who knows, maybe my mastery of the Warhammer will improve by leaps and bounds. Myron said with a look of longing. David is right to choose the spear. Look at the battle between David and Ives Kaji. He has an unparalleled talent for the spear. Jim said with a smile. They did not go anywhere else. Instead, they all gathered at David's house. When the 2.5-meter-long spear was assembled, the faint blue light on the spear merged into one. It was far more impressive than a Tier 2 longsword. Although none of them had learned how to use the spear, they had all tried out the Tier 2 spear in the underground gym. The metal dummy in the gym had been pierced with more than a dozen holes. Chapter 85. David couldn't remember how long it had been since he last sat in a classroom. Now, he was sitting in the spacious and bright classroom. A few days ago, he had been thinking about how he should behave so that he wouldn't be different from before. He had even thought of many ways to deal with it. However, the truth was that he had been overthinking. Ever since he entered the school, he was like an invisible person. He sat in the second-last row of the classroom. The students around him all had the same characteristic. None of them used the monitor on the table to look at the learning content. Some of them were chatting softly while others were playing games. In the first few rows of the classroom, almost all the students there were studying seriously. It was obvious that they were good students at first glance. This reminded David of a joke that he had seen in his previous life. The front row of the classroom was the learning area while the back row was the VIP lounge area. Wearing a black trench coat, Miss Henrietta, who was close to 50 years old, still had her charm. As soon as she entered the classroom, the voices in the VIP lounge area at the back row immediately disappeared. It was obvious that Miss Henrietta was very prestigious in the hearts of the students. Students, I'm glad to see that there are no missing students in our class. Miss Henrietta looked at the neat rows of students and said with a hint of sadness in her voice. All the students understood what the teacher was talking about. The death of nearly 100 young people was a big deal during the winter break. As a result, many of the students in the high school had lost their lives in accidents, which made the students feel extremely lucky. Most of you are very hardworking. You want to get into a better university, go to a bigger and safer city, and have a better living environment. This is also what I hope for. Getting into a good university is your only chance to get out of Parent City. There's still a semester left. You still have time to work hard. Miss Henrietta said in a low voice. Her mood was obviously affected today. Many of the students sitting below were touched. On the monolith star, the smaller the city, the easier it was to be attacked. The only chance to change one's fate was the college entrance exam. At the same time, The college entrance exam was the only chance for most of the students to raise their social status. It would be very difficult for them to raise their social status in the future. In the 3 classes this morning, you will complete 3 tests. Let the school know your learning situation during the winter break. This is related to the school's study plan for you. Please take the test seriously, Miss Henrietta said as she operated the monitor on the podium. David heard the collective wails of the students in the back 3 rows. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Although she was in her 3rd year of high school and was about to take the college entrance examination, there weren't many classes in school. The first class started at 8 in the morning, and the 3 cultural classes ended at 11. They would arrive at school at 2 in the afternoon. After an hour of physical skills class, they could choose to participate in various extracurricular activities. Of course, the 3rd-year students could choose to study in school or leave school. Compared to David's previous life, the studies here were unimaginably easy. David could still remember the terrifying days of waking up at 5 a.m. and going to bed at 11:30 p.m. in high school. At that time, every day was like squeezing out all the energy in his body. Fortunately, he was still young and could withstand it. In the first class, Ms. Henrietta used the optical computer on the podium to distribute the literature test questions to the students on the screen in front of them. David casually picked up the electronic pen and scanned the questions. He found that the questions were very simple and there was nothing complicated about them. Of course, this was related to his mastery of literature. He had discovered this during yesterday's quick quiz. This quiz was easier than the quick quiz, so he could answer it more easily. David used less than 30 minutes to finish the 50-minute class. He thought that he was fast, but when he looked up, he found that the students in the VIP lounge area had already finished answering the questions. Alden, who was sitting at the table opposite of David, saw that David had stopped answering the questions and said softly, "David, you're really good at pretending. If I didn't know your level, I would have thought that you were answering the questions seriously." "Yeah, I can't pretend to answer the questions for half a class. Anyway, I'll just fill in the questions casually. If I'm lucky, I might get more than half of them right." Hamlin, who was sitting in front of him, heard Alden's words and turned around with a smile. David finally understood that the students around him didn't intend to take the quiz seriously at all. They were just going through the motions. Henrietta looked at the back row and couldn't help but shake her head in disappointment. As long as the students in the back didn't affect the good students in the front row, she couldn't be bothered to care. Her hand habitually swept across the completed questions. She didn't need to mark the quiz. The school's education system would automatically mark the quiz after it was submitted. The unsightly answers made Henrietta's anger rise. The highest score she had seen so far didn't exceed 40 out of 100 marks. She also knew that this was related to the current education system. In the 3rd year of high school, many students chose physical skills and gave up cultural studies. However, she knew that there were too few students who could succeed in physical skills. These students who chose physical skills and gave up cultural studies would only end up as workers in the nearby mines, while those who chose cultural studies would at least be able to stay in the city and have a stable position. Hey! When she flipped to a quiz, she found that the quiz had a score of 100 marks. She couldn't help but look at the time. It had only been 35 minutes. There were still 15 minutes until the end of the test. She knew very well how long it would take for her to answer all the questions she had set herself. This test paper was obviously at least 10 minutes ahead of the time she had estimated. She couldn't help but feel suspicious. Henrietta looked at the name on the quiz. It showed David Kerr. Time passed little by little. When 50 minutes were up, all the students automatically submitted their quiz regardless of whether it ended or not. "Take a break for 15 minutes. I'll still preside over the quiz," Henrietta said in a low voice as she looked at the students who stood up at the back of the classroom. No one paid attention to David, who was like an invisible person. The students walked out of the classroom in twos and threes. David was curious about everything around him. He was enjoying his student life. "David, come here." Henrietta waved to David and said, "Miss Henrietta, are you looking for me?" David naturally came to Henrietta's podium and asked aloud. Henrietta looked at this student who used to be very inconspicuous, but now she felt a great difference. The students in the class, whether they had good grades or bad grades, would be nervous when they saw her. There was almost no one who was as natural as David. "David, I've seen your quiz. I can see that you've been working very hard during the winter vacation. The back row will affect your studies, so you'll sit here today. When all the quiz results are out, we'll rearrange the seating order." Although Henrietta didn't believe that David had completed the quiz with his own ability, she couldn't ask directly. So she decided to move David to the front so that she could observe him directly. "Okay, Miss Henrietta." David didn't refuse. Of course, it wasn't up to him to refuse. Henrietta was the head teacher and had the right to deal with the students. The seat was right in front of the podium. It was the seat of a sick student last semester. It had been empty since the student applied for sick leave before the winter vacation. This semester had just begun, so Henrietta was going to rearrange the seats according to the result. David sat in his seat. Several outstanding students around him looked up at him and then ignored him. David didn't expect that he would sit in the front row of the legendary elite study area just after finishing his quiz. The students in the front row didn't pay much attention to him, but the students in the VIP lounge area in the back row were different. They looked at David with a gaze of betrayal. David certainly didn't care about the gazes of these students. He just came to enjoy school life. His body was that of a high school student, so he had to do what a high school student should do. Chapter 86. David easily completed the second test, mathematics, and the third, general studies. With the end of the last test, Henrietta, who had been paying attention to him, looked at him in a different light. Although the test this time was not difficult and was just a small test, it was not so simple. These questions were very typical questions, which involved the knowledge of each subject. David, on the other hand, scored full marks in all three tests. This made Henrietta feel that a genius had been born in front of her. In more than 20 years of teaching, she had seen a few examples of students who only started to show their strength before the college entrance exam, and it was the kind that could not be stopped. Observe more. Henrietta immediately raised David's position in the class to the top. At the same time, she did not mention anything about letting David return to his original seat after school. "David, did you take extra classes during the holidays?" After Henrietta left, David was about to go home, but he was stopped by Alden and a few other students in the VIP lounge area in the back row. "No, I just spent more time reading," David said, shaking his head. Although he was stopped by his classmates, he did not feel much malice. They were probably just curious. "What a pity. You have been practicing physical skills all this time. Now you have switched to cultural studies in the last semester," Alden said regretfully. He himself was good in physical skills, but he was only 20 kilograms higher than David's original 600 kilograms. "My physical skills are not good, and I can't get into cultural studies." "David, did you really not take extra classes?" Hamlin asked, still in disbelief. Half of the students who stopped David wanted to know how David improved his grades. "David, why are you still here?" Myron shouted at the door just as David was surrounded. The whole classroom fell silent. Myron was a famous person in the school, and his background was well known. "Myron, I'm here." David waved his hand and said to the surrounding students, "My friend is here. I'll leave first." No one stopped him. All the students were shocked by Myron's appearance. They couldn't figure out how David, who didn't have any sense of existence, became friends with the second generation of the most powerful official in Perrin City. "Myron, why are you looking for me?" David patted Myron with a smile, then looked at him and said, "You seem to be in good spirits. Didn't you say you hated cultural classes? You're still so energetic after an entire morning of exams." "He slept all morning," De Quincey said in a cold voice as he walked over. "De Quincey, I'll be admitted to an university, but it's not my academic results, it's my physical skills," Myron retorted immediately. "How did your test go, David?" De Quincey didn't look at Myron. Instead, he asked David. "The small test isn't that difficult. I got full marks for all 3 tests." David said nonchalantly, "Myron, I heard that you made a bet with David about your car. Looks like you won't have a car to drive soon." De Quincey sneered at Myron. "David can drive my car away at any time," Myron said nonchalantly. He had completely forgotten that he had begged for a long time to get his Gladstone Type 6. Just as the 3 of them were talking and laughing as they walked, a sharp alarm suddenly sounded. All teachers in the school immediately organized the students to enter the shelter. I repeat, all teachers in the school immediately organized the students to enter the shelter. Then, in the midst of the ear-piercing alarm, the school's broadcast also sounded, constantly repeating, "Students, quickly enter the shelter." Mrs. Henrietta, who hadn't gone far, quickly ran over and shouted without caring about her image. Because school had just ended, most of the students had just left the classroom and hadn't gone far. When they heard Mrs. Henrietta's voice, they also began to run toward the shelter. Not only Miss Henrietta, but the teachers of the other classes also shouted loudly. At this time, the alarm, the school's announcement, the teachers' shouts, and the students' noises made the whole school chaotic. Fortunately, the school had always insisted on organizing self-rescue training, so although the scene was a little chaotic, they moved quickly. "Let's go to the shelter too. Something big has happened." Myron opened his ID bracelet but didn't see the corresponding message, so he quickly said. Normally, with his status, he should have received the relevant message by now. But he didn't receive the message, which meant that even his father should be busy and didn't have time to inform him. De Quincey nodded. He also didn't receive the corresponding message. However, David saw that his identity bracelet was constantly flashing. This kind of flashing would only appear when there was an urgent message. He ran with his 2 friends while checking his ID bracelet. City Defense Brigade Combat Reserve David Kerr, you are immediately summoned to the south gate of Perrin City to assist the army in guarding the city wall. When he saw this message, he stopped. David, why did you stop? Hurry up. Myron saw David stop and shouted anxiously. You guys go, I've been summoned by the army. David shook his ID bracelet and said helplessly. Damn it, didn't Jim say that there hasn't been a call for 20 years? Myron's face paled and he cried out, the insectoids have invaded. Hurry up and go to the shelter. Don't worry, I'll be with the army. There won't be a problem. David didn't want his 2 friends to stay here for too long and hurriedly pushed Myron. Take care and remember to keep in touch. Myron also knew that this wasn't the time to talk, and he didn't have the authority to interfere with the army's actions. Even his father didn't have the ability to do so. David, don't show off. Protect yourself. De Quincey softly reminded him. For a second-generation official like him to be able to say such words, he must have really regarded David as his best friend to remind him. David waved his hand and immediately ran out of the school gate. At the same time, the ID bracelet on his wrist showed a new authority notification. David looked at the ID bracelet. It said, You currently have temporary military war zone privileges and priority to use public facilities. David, what are you doing? Miss Henrietta had just finished checking the classroom and was running back to God's sanctuary. She saw David running in the opposite direction, so she questioned him loudly. Miss Henrietta, I've been summoned by the army. David didn't stop and explained loudly as he ran. Is the army crazy? Recruiting a high school student. Henrietta didn't think David was lying because she saw the closed school gate automatically open when David approached. This was the effect of military war zone privileges. David was also very surprised. When he rushed out of the school, he saw that there was no one on the street at this time. Everyone had taken shelter in the nearest shelter. At this time, a public transport hover car was parked nearby. He quickly ran over, opened the door of the public transport hover car, and got in. Military war zone privileges detected. Please state your destination. This service is free. The public transport hover car's assistance system prompted. Go to the South Gate military zone immediately, David said. As soon as David finished speaking, the public transport hover car suddenly rose to a height of 30 meters and then rushed toward the South Gate at a speed that David had never thought possible. This was the first time he knew that public transport hover cars could rise and fly. These public transport hover cars used to be about half a meter above the ground. Through the window, he also saw the situation in the city. From time to time, Kaji wearing exoskeleton armor and holding weapons ran toward the city wall. They should have been summoned as well. In less than 5 minutes, the journey that would have taken dozens of minutes to get there was completed. When David jumped out of the public transport hover car, he saw a group of armed people entering the city from outside the city gate. Those were the crows that had gone out. These crows all had a look of fear on their faces, as if they had seen something terrible outside the city. David's heart sank. This was really a big deal. What happened to the Zergs? He pushed the crows in front of him away and walked toward the gate of the military zone. This made the crows who were pushed away a little unhappy, but looking in the direction he was going, no crow dared to say anything. Chapter 87. Please show your ID bracelet. A soldier on guard duty at the South Gate yelled as he tightened his grip on his weapon. David showed his ID bracelet to show the conscription order, which also showed that he was a reserve combatant. The soldier scanned his ID bracelet and said to David, "You're fast. Based on your specialty, you'll be assigned to a post after entering the military zone. Please don't wander around as you please and follow the instructions." David nodded and walked into the military zone. He was still a few dozen meters away from the south wall. Beep. David Kerr has entered the assigned military zone. Please head to the 5th Long-Range Sniper Cannons control room immediately. A message flashed on his ID bracelet. In the control room, First Lieutenant Eaton looked at the city defense information on the wall and felt a headache coming on. He had just received an alert from Skynet that a group of insectoids had broken through from planet Warstar and entered planet Monolith. Affected by this, all the insectoids on planet Monolith became active. The rank 1 and even rank 2 insectoids that had been hiding began to show themselves. Even their larvae were evolving rapidly. Even if they did not have enough energy, they would evolve into rank 1 insectoids with weaker combat abilities. Even the insectoids near Parent City began to evolve. The crows outside were the first to bear the brunt of this. Apart from those that were especially close to the city defense system and were saved by the city defense system, the crows that were further away suffered heavy casualties. The situation was still fine, and First Lieutenant Eaton was confident that the city defense system could stop the insectoids that kept appearing. However, the insectoids that got close to planet Monolith would become a huge threat once they entered the city. He did not blame planet Warstar's army. He had fought there before and knew that the environment there was countless times worse than planet Monolith. The insectoids had their own special abilities. The rank 3 insectoid Spatial Ripper did not even have combat abilities, but it had the ability to open a short-distance wormhole. Fortunately, the wormhole opened by the Spatial Ripper was restricted by the law, and only insectoids that were weaker than the Spatial Ripper could pass through. Therefore, the insectoids that broke through this time were at most rank 2. Planet Monolith's Skynet defense system had been fully activated, but with the Spatial Ripper present, Skynet's defense system was limited. The insectoids were very smart. They knew that if they wanted to avoid the attack of the Interstellar Federation's superweapons, they had to get close to the city and make the superweapons hesitate. Moreover, the Zergs would bring more powerful genes with them when they entered the Monolith Star. This would allow the larvae of the Monolith Star to evolve in more ways. Once the Space Ripper successfully entered the city, it would have enough energy to replenish itself. It would reproduce on the Monolith Star. If such a situation occurred, the Monolith Star would encounter even more terrifying insectoid attacks in the future. There would often be small wormholes opened in the center of the city, and then a large number of insectoids would flood in. This was something they had already experienced on other planets close to Warstar, so this was a battle they could not afford to lose. How many snipers are on vacation? First Lieutenant Eaton noticed that only 70% of the long-range sniper cannons could be used. He asked his adjutant in a deep voice, "Captain, 5 of the snipers are on vacation. They are not in Perrin City." The adjutant replied quickly, "There are only 30 snipers in total, and 5 of them are on vacation." First Lieutenant Eaton said angrily, "There were not many real snipers in the city defense system. During wartime, each sniper would have to operate multiple long-range sniper cannons. This phenomenon occurred mainly because of the difficulty of training snipers. Most of the trained snipers would be sent to other planets that needed them more. The Monolith Star, which was located at the outermost edge of the war zone, did not receive the most attention in terms of soldiers. This was also related to the fact that the insectoids were sealed off from the front lines. Normally, it would be enough to ensure that there was a sniper stationed at intervals on the city walls to support small-scale battles. Fortunately, the heavy laser cannons, rapid-fire anti-air cannons, and Gaussian cannons were all directly controlled by the main control room. There were not many professionals needed to operate them, so these weapons would not be affected in the upcoming battle. "How many Kaji are here so far?" First Lieutenant Eaton asked again. "Currently, the Kaji squadron is fully assembled. 53 civilian Kaji have been recruited. The city government has agreed to send 20 Kaji as support if needed," the adjutant continued. David did not know the situation in the command center. He also did not understand why he was assigned to the long-range sniper cannons control room. He thought that he would be assigned to some kind of logistics work. Little did he know that the preferential treatment he enjoyed as a reserve combatant was built on the basis that he was a special talent. His special talent was sniping. During wartime, the military command system would automatically determine every military personnel and assign them to the most needed positions. This kind of order did not need to go through the command center. It would be directly sent to the personnel's ID bracelet. Of course, if the command center had an order, the command center's order would take precedence. It was also because of such a command system that all the recruited personnel could perform their duties after entering the military zone without any chaos. David followed the instructions on his ID bracelet and took the elevator to the top of the city wall. As soon as he stepped out of the elevator, he heard a violent explosion and all kinds of charging sound. Previously, when he was in the city, due to the existence of the soundproof barrier, the city did not feel the impending war. Although he was alarmed by the alarm, it was far less shocking than hearing the actual explosion. David walked up the city wall. Everything in front of him shocked him. The city wall was very different from the last time he was here. Previously, there were only long-range sniper cannons on the wall. Now there were heavy laser cannons and Gaussian cannons. On the inner side of the wall, there were rows of rapid-fire anti-air cannons that sealed off the entire sky. The loud sound just now came from the heavy laser cannons and the sniper cannons that fired from time to time. The shadow attendant on top of his head looked outside the city wall from 10 meters above him. The heavy laser cannons closest to him fired, and a beam of light with a diameter of 1 meter shot out. In the distance, dozens of small, strange, ball-like zergs were rolling rapidly. They were still 3,000 meters away from the city wall. The laser beam swept across the leftmost ball-like zergs, and then swept from left to right, leaving a trail on the ground. At the same time, half of the ball-like zergs were killed. Most of the zergs that were swept by the laser were directly vaporized, while the rest exploded and turned into a green mist. The area was immediately surrounded by the green mist. "What are you doing? Go to your post. Remember to put on the protective suit. The poisonous mist is coming." A sergeant in a fully enclosed combat suit shouted at David. "Yes." David immediately rushed to the designated sniper control room number 5. Since when were there snipers among the enlisted personnel? The sergeant shook his head and muttered to himself. He was not worried that there would be a problem. During wartime, all weapons and equipment were controlled by the command system. Without the command system's authorization, even the elevators could not be used, let alone enter the combat post. David saw that the green poisonous mist was drifting towards the city wall due to the wind direction. He quickly put his bracelet near the control room's door. With a soft sound, the control room's door opened. He walked in and closed the door. He saw the protective suit hanging on the side and quickly put it on. Even the helmet was neatly put on. At this time, a set of notifications popped up on his bracelet, indicating that he had obtained the permission to operate the sniper control room number 5. At the same time, he could control the sniper cannons number 5, 6, and 7. Does this city defense really need snipers? They're using snipers like cows. David complained as he turned on the equipment. Fortunately, he had used the shadow attendant to operate this thing last time. Otherwise, if he was really a newbie, he would have to look at the terrifyingly thick manual on the side while operating the sniper aiming system. In fact, his appearance here was simply an accident. He was a special talent, but special talents like him would undergo military training every once in a while to familiarize themselves with the combat skills they should master. However, on one hand, David was a student and would leave Parent City in half a year. On the other hand, David's identity was more to make it easier for him to legally obtain the Death's Eye replica. Therefore, the city defense team did not plan to let him undergo military training. Chapter 88. David turned on the screen. The sniper system was very simple. It used a control device to control the long-range sniper cannon. Through manual steering or direct input of coordinates, it could quickly locate the target and aim. With the electronic countermeasure ability, he only needed to observe for a while to grasp how to adjust the system to switch between the 3 long-range sniper cannons. He controlled the shadow attendant to fly out of the control room. From a high vantage point, he could directly see the entire battlefield. He did not want to be surrounded by the zergs in the control room. It was not as if he did not have a backup plan. The fire beacon was his backup plan. If Parent City could not be defended, he would drive the fire beacon to pick up his father, Hans, and his family. He would also try his best to bring along a few friends and escape together. Even if the existence of the fire beacon was exposed, he would not hesitate to be hunted down by the organization. His identity bracelet had received new information about the insectoids that had appeared outside the city. He saw the spherical zergs. They were called poison impact beetles. They were a weak level 1 zerg. As their larvae could not obtain enough energy, they gathered all the energy in their bodies. When they encountered an enemy, they would self-destruct to spread the toxins in their bodies, causing great damage. There were also a few zergs that he had seen in the illusion before. For example, the hunter mantis, giant worm, and spiked caliceri. Just as David was looking at the information, he received another message on his identity bracelet: Control Room 5, enter the battle immediately. It seemed that he had been looking at it for too long and had not entered the battle. The command system had added an additional order. David grabbed the control device, and the scene of the battlefield outside the city appeared on the screen. He quickly adjusted the control device and looked at the wind speed, wind direction, temperature, and humidity on the screen. At the same time, he was looking for a target. Kaji did not need to worry about the poison impact beetles. They were usually dealt with by the heavy laser cannon. The best choice for the long-range sniper cannon was the stronger level 1 Zergs. On the screen, the giant worm appeared. Its long body looked disgusting, but its shrinking speed was not slow at all. The giant worm waved around with a faint fluorescent light on it. It was a terrifying weapon with level 1 destructive power. Once the giant embedded worms got close, even the steel walls would not be able to stop them. Although a single level 1 Zerg would need some time to destroy the thick walls, there were too many level 1 Zergs. The walls would be destroyed in an instant. Within 3 seconds, David had locked onto the target. In his eyes, a virtual trajectory had been formed, connecting the long-range sniper cannon to the giant worm. Boom! He fired the long-range sniper rifle. This shot hit the giant worm's head, opening up a penetrating wound in the center of its head. Only by truly using this terrifying weapon would one be able to feel the dominance of life. The terrifying level 1 warhead treated the giant worm's armor as if it was nothing. Unfortunately, this place was too far away from the battlefield. Although the shadow attendant was hovering in the air, it couldn't absorb any souls. David did not dare to leave the city at this time. Not to mention that military orders were like mountains. If he dared to leave his post, it was very likely that the command system would judge him as a deserter. Just take the current situation outside the city as an example. Although the battle was not intense, there were heavy laser cannons sweeping the ground from time to time. Not to mention a normal person like him, even Kaji, who was wearing exoskeleton armor, did not dare to rush out like this. With a heart full of reluctance to waste souls, he moved his hand and switched to the number 6 long-range sniper rifle system. Every time the long-range sniper rifle fired, it needed to pause for a while. This time, on the one hand, was to allow the system to stabilize the cannon and add level 1 bullets into the long-range sniper rifle. This process was due to the size of the long-range sniper rifle. Although it was automatic, it still needed some time to complete. This process usually took 5 seconds. During this process, the long-range sniper rifle could not be operated. This was also the reason why a sniper could control multiple long-range sniper rifles. The equipment needed a buffer, but the person did not. This time, David once again looked for a new target. After about 10 seconds, he found a new target. He then spent 3 seconds to analyze and calculate before firing. At this time, he realized that perhaps he did not need to use the long-range sniper rifle's aiming system to find the level 1 Zerg. The shadow attendant hovering in the sky outside could see more clearly. The shadow attendant was 10 meters higher than the city wall. At this height, it had a panoramic view of everything within 5 kilometers. David only needed to divert a bit of his attention to observe, and he would be able to obtain information about the level 1 Zerg. Therefore, when he switched to the number 7 long-range sniper rifle, it only took him 5 seconds to fire the third bullet. Report the sniper's battle results. Lieutenant Eaton ordered in a deep voice. Although the heavy laser cannons and Gauss cannons were firing non-stop, the time interval between each firing of these heavy weapons was constantly increasing. In order to ensure the safety of these heavy weapons and prevent them from self-destructing due to overuse, the use of these heavy weapons was strictly controlled. Most importantly, the heavy laser cannons and Gauss cannons were not good at attacking a single target. With a long preparation time, It was impossible for them to lock onto the level 1 Zerg that moved faster. Unless the level 1 Zerg happened to appear in the range of the heavy weapons, it was impossible to target a specific level 1 Zerg. Therefore, the long-range sniper rifle became a very targeted killing weapon. It was the best complement to the heavy weapons. Captain, these are the results of the snipers so far. The adjutant's fingers moved quickly as he quickly replied. Not bad. The snipers are more trustworthy. Lieutenant Eaton nodded as he looked. Although the snipers were difficult to manage, the snipers' attack power was still very impressive after the war had begun. On average, each sniper had killed at least 10 level 1 Zergs in 10 minutes. More than 200 level 1 Zergs had been wiped out. If this was in the wild, it was almost the same as the result of a medium-sized hunting squad in a year. With the city's defense and various heavy weapons to rely on, the level 1 Zergs were extremely fragile. He was already calculating in his heart. Just the level 1 Zerg carcasses alone would be a great harvest by the end of this war. However, with the heavy laser cannons and Gauss cannons firing from time to time, who knew how many Zerg carcasses would be left intact in the end? Why did sniper rifle number 5 only kill 3 level 1 Zergs? Lieutenant Eaton asked in a deep voice as he scanned the data and noticed something was wrong. Sniper rifle number 5 was at the side of the south gate. No matter how few level 1 Zergs there would be more than 3. Captain, that's a civilian sniper who just arrived at sniper rifle number 5. The adjutant immediately replied after checking the data. At this moment, Lieutenant Eaton saw the kill count change from 3 to 4, then to 5, and then to 6 after 5 seconds. Switch to sniper rifle number 5's image. Lieutenant Eaton ordered again. Following the adjutant's operation, a sniper rifle's view appeared on the wall in front of Lieutenant Eaton. As soon as the sniper rifle's view appeared, it aimed at a level 1 Zerg that was running at high speed. Then, the level 1 Zerg fell to the ground. The image changed to another position. This time, the sniper rifle's view found another level 1 Zerg. Just like before, the level 1 Zerg fell to the ground with a green hole in its head. The image kept changing. Every 5 to 10 seconds, a level 1 Zerg would be killed by a headshot. Lieutenant Eaton was certain that he did not have such a talent among his subordinates. If it were not for the long-range sniper rifle, he would have thought that there were multiple Kaji snipers taking turns to attack. Who's this civilian sniper? Lieutenant Eaton turned around and asked. The name shown is David Kerr, the adjutant replied. So it's him. First Lieutenant Eaton nodded and muttered to himself. His heart was in turmoil. He had known for a long time that this genius had the halo of being the descendant of the nation knight, had Galen's guidance, and had a talent for sniping that made his son Jim gasp in amazement. However, it was only now that he realized how terrifying David's talent was. This was a sniper Kaji sniper rifle without using Kaji sniper rifle. Every attack was a kill. This was the specialty of a Kaji sniper. Either he did not attack or he attacked with a fatal blow. Chapter 89. David's learning ability was terrifying thanks to his strong spirit. Under his control, the 3 long-range sniper cannons would fire once every few seconds. The shadow attendant determined the position of the Class 1 Zergs in the air, while David manually entered the coordinates on the control device. This reduced the aiming time of the long-range sniper cannons and increased the number of shots. Outside the city wall, as more and more poison impact beetles were killed, the green poisonous fog became thicker and thicker, almost to the point where vision was blocked. Some of the green poisonous fog even floated to the top of the city wall. Even in the sniper control room number 5 where David was, a faint green poisonous fog began to appear. David's protective military uniform automatically activated its internal circulation mode, and the internal life support system provided the oxygen needed. The technology to generate oxygen had already reached its peak. Relying on the protective military uniform's energy block, as long as the energy was not depleted, oxygen would continue to be provided. Therefore, David did not have to worry about the green poisonous fog causing any harm to him. However, the poisonous fog that was getting thicker and thicker affected the speed at which he discovered the Class 1 Zergs. Activating cleansing mode. Hearing the notification from the control room, the shadow attendant saw many small holes on the city wall, and these holes spewed out a mist. The mist mixed with the poisonous fog, turning into green water that fell to the ground. It seemed that the city defense system already had a way to deal with the poisonous fog. Come to think of it, the Federation had been fighting against the Zergs for thousands of years. During this time, they had already prepared against the Zergs. The ventilation system in the control room also began to work, expelling the poisonous fog from the room. When David first participated in the city defense, he was still a little nervous, but now he no longer felt that way. To be honest, this city defense battle was much safer than the battles he experienced in the Illusion. The powerful Class 1 Zergs were either cleaned up by the heavy laser cannons or blown to pieces by the Gaussian cannons. Those that could escape were targeted and eliminated by the long-range sniper cannons. The entire battle was done by sitting in front of the display screen and using the control device in his hand. When he received the conscription order, he didn't even have the time to go home to get his weapons. But now, he realized that even if he got his level 2 longsword and spear, he wouldn't have the chance to use them. Besides, David knew himself well. Although he had a cold weapon mastery that was comparable to Kaji's, he did not have Kaji's exoskeleton armor. If he were to face a Class 1 Zerg head-on, he would be crushed. After David had been attacking continuously for 10 minutes, a row of notifications appeared on the screen in front of him. Warning! Warning! Number 5, Number 6, and Number 7 long-range sniper cannons have overheated and are currently on cooldown. The cooldown process will take 100 seconds. Then, he lost control of all 3 of his long-range sniper cannons. Shaking his head, David let go of the controller in his hand. At this moment, the shadow attendant saw the Zerg begin to retreat and disappear from sight. That's it. David muttered to himself in confusion. However, the identity bracelet still showed that he was conscripted. He still had control of the 3 long-range sniper cannons. The Zerg's attack shouldn't end so easily. At this time, David received a video call request from his father, Hans, and he chose to accept. "David, where are you?" Hans's figure appeared on the identity bracelet, but he stopped halfway because he saw David's environment. As a veteran who had participated in many wars, he naturally knew where David was. "Why are you in the city defense's sniper control room?" Hans asked anxiously. "Father, I was conscripted. It's very safe here. Are you, Aunt Bertha, and little Idy safe?" David did not say much about his situation and changed the topic. "We're all fine. We've all been moved to the shelter," Hans answered while using his authority to check David's situation. As David's guardian, he had the authority to check all of David's information. However, he did not expect that David would be conscripted. Soon, he saw the reason for the conscription. Sniping was his specialty, and he had the potential to snipe Kaji. This made him happy because the reason he was able to get the title of National Knight was because of his sniping ability. This meant that his son had inherited his talent. As for the war conscription, if it was Kaji who was a melee fighter, it would still be very dangerous. However, if it was a sniper conscription, it would be relatively safer. Besides, if even the sniper control room was threatened, it meant that the city could not be defended. At that time, it would also be unsafe in the city. Thinking of this, Hans's nervous expression relaxed a little. "David, pay attention to safety. When using the long-range sniper cannons, don't attack at full power. How many long-range sniper cannons are you controlling now?" Hans reminded and asked in a very professional manner. I'm controlling 3 long-range sniper cannons right now. David also understood the meaning behind Hans's words and quickly answered. The city defense is crazy. They're letting a newbie like you control 3 long-range sniper cannons. Hans could not help but complain when he heard this result. He then said, the 3 long-range sniper cannons have to maintain a firing rate of at least 1 shot every 15 seconds. Do not increase it. The alloy of the long-range sniper cannons cannot withstand continuous overclocking attack. Also, you have to make sure that, if the Zergs rush up the wall, you have to have the long-range sniper cannons to protect your control room. David was stunned. From the battle just now, he understood the problem of long-range sniper cannons overheating. As long as he thought about it, if he could not fire for 100 seconds in a continuous battle, it would definitely be a disaster. However, he had never thought of using long-range sniper cannons to defend his control room. Once the control room is breached by the Zergs, you have to adjust the temperature of the protective suit to 0 and keep your body motionless. There's a certain chance that you can avoid the Zergs' attacks, Hans continued. This method was a method of playing dead. It would make the Zergs think that they were corpses, so there was a certain chance that they would not destroy the corpses. This was because when the city defense was breached, there would be fresh lives everywhere, and the Zergs would have better targets. Of course, this method was also despised by the army. However, David was not a real soldier. Most importantly, David was his son. He had sacrificed everything for the Federation, including his body and his family. He did not want his son, David, to die in a war before reaching adulthood. Even if he was a nation knight, the selfishness in his heart still existed. "Father, I know," David replied in a deep voice. He then said softly, "Father, if the city defense is breached and you have no chance to escape, then bring Auntie and Edie to this address. I've prepared some safe means of escape here." Along with the message was the location of his hideout. "David, you've grown up." Hans laughed out loud. He was a warrior who crawled out of corpses and did not care much about the Zergs' attack. However, he was very touched by David's concern. As for the safe means of escape that David mentioned, Hans did not ask much. Children always had their own secrets when they grew up. "Father, when the war is over, I'll explain to you," David said one last time before ending the video call. After ending the call with Hans, David sat in Sniper Control Room 5 and felt responsible for the first time. Behind him was his father, his family, and his friends. While he was thinking, something happened outside the city. On the ground 20 meters away from the city wall, larvae crawled out of the ground. Within 20 meters of the city wall, the ground was reinforced with a special alloy. Therefore, if these larvae wanted to get close to the city wall, they had to crawl out of the ground 20 meters away. These larvae were not the same as the larvae that David had seen before. These larvae were no longer dirt gray. Under the dirt gray shell, the dark green blood gave the shell a strange color. David also received the name and introduction of these larvae on his ID bracelet. Corrosive mutant larvae, a special Zerg that mutated from larvae. They had no combat power, but after their bodies were destroyed, they would produce a strong corrosive liquid. Although his 3 long-range sniper cannons had been repaired, he saw in the aiming system that these corrosive mutant larvae were prohibited from attacking. Therefore, all he could do was watch these corrosive mutant larvae crawl out of the ground one by one and approach the city wall. Chapter 90. Just as the corrosive mutant larvae were 10 meters away from the city wall, holes opened up at the bottom of the city wall and rows of flames spewed out. The corrosive mutant larvae let out a shrill cry and rolled around in the flames. However, at such a close distance, the corrosive mutant larvae were not fast, so there was no way to avoid them. Once the flames were ignited with a special accelerant, they could not be extinguished. The corrosive mutant larvae's bodies and the ground nearby became a sea of fire. The corrosive mutant larvae that could not get close to the city wall began to self-destruct. However, in the flames, the corrosive liquid in their bodies was greatly reduced. Most of the corrosive liquid was vaporized by the flames before it could reach the ground. The fire burned for 5 minutes. After the flames were extinguished, there were no longer any corrosive mutant larvae at the base of the city wall. Only the corroded metal ground was left. This was because the corrosive mutant larvae were not allowed to self-destruct beside the city wall. Otherwise, these weak larvae would definitely cause a lot of trouble for the city defense. David felt that it was strange. During this process, the rank 1 Zergs outside the city did not attack the city. It was as if they were waiting for something. He could not help but recall that the Zergs were also an intelligent race. However, not all Zergs had intelligence. The higher the level of the Zergs, the higher their intelligence. Among the level 1 insectoids, it was possible to mutate into an intelligent insectoid with higher intelligence. He did not know if this was the situation outside the city or if there were even more terrifying rank 2 Zergs. Of course, with the city defense, the rank 2 Zergs would have to pay a huge price to attack the city defense. Very few rank 2 Zergs would do so. For example, if the heavy laser cannon wanted to cause damage to the rank 2 Zergs, it would require continuous attack. With the rank 2 Zergs' faster speed and stronger defense, it was almost impossible for the heavy laser cannon to lock onto them. Only when the rank 2 Zergs were close to the city defense would multiple heavy laser cannons be effective. Warning: spatial fluctuation detected. Activating the city's energy shield. The city defense system automatically issued a warning. The shadow attendant in the sky saw that inside the city wall, a transparent energy net covered the entire city. Then, the energy net emitted a noise of energy flow. The energy net grid slowly disappeared and formed a completely transparent energy shield. This is the legendary energy shield. Through the eyes of the shadow attendant, David looked at the energy shield that looked like a giant soap bubble under the sunlight. He was in awe of the technology in this world. Activating an energy shield to defend a city naturally required a huge amount of energy, which would consume a lot of krypton crystals. This would be a huge loss for Parent City. Therefore, the energy shield would not be activated normally. Even in David's memory, he did not see Parent City activating the energy shield. Now that the energy shield had been activated, it meant that great danger was approaching. After the energy shield was activated, it did not cover the city walls. The city defense system was arranged outside the energy shield. It was said that apart from a specific type of weapon, most heavy weapons were unable to fire from within the energy shield. This also meant that once the city defense system was protected by the energy shield, the result would be a complete loss of combat power. This was an outcome that no one wanted to see. The safety of a city depended on the energy shield, and once the energy of the shield was depleted, the entire city would be completely breached. The shadow attendant observed from the sky, trying to find the source of the danger. At this time, Kaji jumped up from the passageway of the city wall. They were holding all kinds of weapons and stood on the city wall in an orderly manner. David could not see the expressions of these Kaji as their heads were completely covered by their helmet. However, he could see that they were all Kaji from the military. All of the Kaji were wearing the Land Lion exoskeleton armor. This was the military's land exoskeleton armor. Among them, he even saw 5 Kaji with Grade 2 weapons. Attention, the wormhole will open at any time. Our mission is to defend the city wall to the death. Behind us is our home, our family. The soldiers of the Federation will never retreat. Lieutenant Elmer was also wearing the Land Lion exoskeleton armor. He spoke in a deep voice through the exoskeleton armor's loudspeaker. This was not only for the Kaji but also for the other soldiers on the city wall. When David saw the military rank on the Land Lion exoskeleton armor, he immediately knew who it was. It was the rank of First Lieutenant and the military Land Lion exoskeleton armor. This was Daly's father, and also the leader of the Kaji squadron under the City Defense Brigade. He counted again. There were about 100 Kaji from the military here, which was exactly the entire squadron. It seemed that the parent City Defense Brigade had sent out the entire Kaji squadron. However, David did not know what the wormhole was. The shadow attendant observed the surroundings and did not see any Zergs. Just as he was observing through the shadow attendant's vision, he suddenly felt a strong, strange energy fluctuation. This was the shadow attendant's innate perception. The location was 5 meters above the city wall, which was a kilometer away from the number 5 control room. The shadow attendant looked in that direction. The military had also found the specific location of the wormhole through some kind of device. The 2 heavy laser cannons closest to them turned their huge cannons and aimed at that location. Then 2 dazzling light beams shot out, penetrating the air and passing through the location of the strange energy fluctuation. However, an even brighter light shone. Fortunately, the shadow attendant did not feel the various kinds of dazzling light. No matter how bright the light was, it did not affect his vision. At this moment, the 2 laser beams seemed to have lost their light. In the shadow attendant's vision, the surroundings became pitch black due to the appearance of the wormhole. This was actually an illusion because the wormhole was too bright when it appeared. The wormhole only lit up for less than a second before it stabilized. The strong light also disappeared, and a ripple-like hole appeared in the air. The hole was emitting a blue light. The 2 laser beams continued to attack but did not affect the appearance of the wormhole. As soon as the wormhole stabilized, the shadow attendant who was far away heard a loud buzzing sound. Then, a flying Zerg with a pair of transparent wings, a hideous head and blade-like forelimbs flew out of the wormhole. It's a ripper-winged insect. Pay attention to the formation, Lieutenant Elmer ordered loudly. The ripper-winged insect was a type of level 1 flying Zerg that moved in group. Although it was not the strongest existence among the level 1 Zergs, its speed was the fastest. Coupled with its flying ability, it was the most difficult level 1 Zerg to deal with. As soon as the first ripper-winged insect flew out of the wormhole, it was hit by 2 laser beams. Its tough carapace could not withstand the continuous attacks of the heavy laser beams. This direct hit vaporized the wings on the back of the ripper-winged insect, and its carapace was charred black. However, its tenacious vitality made it instinctively want to escape the range of the laser beams. Just as the ripper-winged insect successfully escaped the attack of the 2 laser beams, a level 2 battle axe flashing with a faint blue light chopped down on the ripper-winged insect's body, splitting it into 2. The one who attacked was Lieutenant Elmer. Just a moment ago, he stomped his feet on the ground. As soon as the ripper-winged insect escaped the laser beams, the level 2 battle axe in his hand took advantage of the momentum to deliver a fatal blow. Nice! The Kaji cheered loudly. A level 1 Zerg was not easy to deal with. Even if they were trained and coordinated well, it would still take 5 Kaji's cooperation to kill a level 1 Zerg without any injuries. Of course, the Kajis knew that the ripper-winged insect was killed by Lieutenant Elmer in one hit because it was heavily injured by the 2 laser beams. However, being able to kill a level 1 Zerg at the beginning of the battle was a huge boost to their morale. Contrary to the excitement of the Kajis, Lieutenant Elmer was not happy at all. This time, a portion of the Zergs in space had chosen Parent City. This was the worst possible outcome. He did not know how many Zergs would appear. Although he had scanned the wormhole's location, he did not know if his 100 Kajis could stop the invasion of the Zergs. As for the civilian Kajis, he did not have any hope. Unless it was a Kajis who had retired from the military and returned home, their true combat ability against the Zergs would be far inferior to the Kajis of the military. Chapter 91. Firing the heavy laser cannon for a long period of time was extremely taxing on the body. Therefore, when the second flying insect flew out, it was only able to vaporize the wings of the flying insect, causing it to be slightly injured before it was forced to shut down. This time, Lieutenant Elmer did not step forward. This injured flying insect was to provide Kaji with the spoils of war. He was only trying to boost morale. 5. Kaji stepped forward. Kaji, who was at the front, was holding a large shield. He did not underestimate the flying insect just because it was injured and could not fly. The Great Shield Warrior used his level 1 Great Shield to block in front of his body. Suddenly, he charged forward and slammed into the Ripper-winged insect's body. Since the Ripper-winged bug was a flying bug, it was not very heavy. It was only about 200 kilograms. Furthermore, it was stunned by the 2 laser beams. Before it could react, it was hit by the Shield Warrior. It was sent flying and smashed into the special alloy fortification at the side. Before the flying insect could react, Warhammer Kaji, who was behind Shield Kaji, struck the flying insect's head with his rank 1 Warhammer. The powerful impact of the Warhammer caused the flying insect to be pinned to the alloy fortification. At the same time, 2 rank 1 heavy axes hacked into the flying insect's body, creating 2 intersecting wounds on its outer shell. A rank 1 long spear, glowing like a poisonous snake, pierced through the 2 intersecting wounds on the flying insect's outer shell and pierced through its heart. At the last moment of its life, the flying insect launched its final attack. Its 2 front limbs sliced through the air and struck towards the enemy in front of it. Shield Kaji's large shield appeared in time and blocked in front of the flying insect's front limbs. The large shield let out an ear-piercing sound of friction. Shield Kaji's exoskeleton armor created a 20-centimeter deep scratch on the special alloy ground. However, this was also the flying insect's final attack. Everything was completed in a short 2 seconds. The perfect cooperation of the 5 Kaji made the battle extremely simple. However, no one was cheering anymore. This was because the flying insects were constantly flying out of the wormhole. The 5 Kaji's team continued to advance, luring the Ripper-winged insects to the side to engage in battle. However, the battle now was not as easy as before. The Ripper-winged insects with the ability to fly and the Ripper-winged insects without the ability to fly were 2 completely different types of combat power. In the Shadow Attendant's vision, the Ripper-winged bug's flight was more like a short-distance teleportation. The Shadow Attendant could only see a shadow flashing across a distance of 3 to 4 meters, and when it reappeared, it was already 3 to 4 meters away. Air Defense Rapid-Fire Support. First Lieutenant Elmer roared. He did not want Kaji and the Ripper-winged bug to risk their lives without any support. The command center received the request and activated all the rapid-fire anti-air cannons. As long as the Rip-winged insects flew beyond Kaji's attack range, the rapid-fire anti-air cannons would continuously spit out a large amount of ammunition. This was an intensive barrage of 100,000 bullets per minute. Although the bullets were not first-grade warheads, they could greatly impede the flight of the Ripper-winged insect. As long as the Ripper-winged insects flew too high, they would be hit by a large amount of bullets, causing them to lose control of their bodies and fall from the sky. The rapid-fire anti-air cannons were not lethal to the Ripper-winged insects, but the bullets fired by the rapid-fire anti-air cannons were too dense. The bullets weighed only 200 kilograms, which was a perfect counter to the Ripper-winged insects that were known for their speed and agility. This was also the reason why the rapid-fire anti-air cannons were deployed. Most of the flying insectoids had this weakness. With the help of the rapid-fire anti-air cannons, Kaji's army was able to continuously kill 5 of the Ripper-winged insects that had fallen to the ground. However, the Ripper-winged insects were still pouring out of the wormhole. Currently, there were already 15 Ripper-winged insects that were still alive. This number would soon exceed the capacity of this Kaji's army. Of course, the 5 Kaji's army who were armed with second-grade weapons did not participate in the battle. Their mission was to deal with the insectoids that normal Kaji's army could not defeat. Even if the Ripper-winged insects broke through the encirclement of Kaji's army and flew to other places, the 5 Kaji's army would not be able to leave the wormhole. This was because once a powerful second-grade insectoid appeared from the wormhole, they would be the only hope. It was extremely common for a second-grade insectoid to flatten a city without any restrictions. This was especially true when a second-grade insectoid appeared on top of the city walls. Most of the long-range heavy weapons could not focus fire on the city walls. It was extremely dangerous. All combat units, eliminate the targets outside the city. The command center's command rang out in every combat post. When the wormhole appeared, the insectoids outside the city began to madly rush into the city. At this time, the army of Perrin's city no longer held back. Just as David was preparing to snipe, he saw through the vision of the shadow attendant that heavy missiles were flying out of the hole in the yellow area of the city walls. These heavy missiles flew straight into the sky and then, with the guidance of the army's defense system, they flew towards the insectoids on the ground. Even if the missiles did not directly hit the insectoids, the power of the explosion was enough to severely injure or even kill the level 1 insectoids within a 10-meter radius of the explosion. When David saw the lethality of these heavy missiles, he knew that there was a large amount of first-grade metals in the warhead of these heavy missiles. Otherwise, it would not be able to penetrate the outer shell of the level 1 insectoids so easily. It was no wonder that they did not use these heavy missiles to attack just now. Every single one of these heavy missiles was piled up with credits. David did not attack the targets outside the city because after this attack, a large number of insectoids had fallen outside the city. Even those that survived were killed by other snipers, heavy laser cannons, and Gaussian cannons. In fact, David did not know that only the area in front of him was used with heavy missiles. Due to the existence of the wormhole, they did not want to put more pressure on this part of the city walls. That was why they used the heavy missiles to clear out the area in front of him. David quickly entered a set of coordinates. The body of the number 5 long-range sniper cannon quickly turned and aimed towards the wormhole. He did not know why the other snipers did not attack, but he knew his own ability. He could definitely attack the Ripper-winged insect. In fact, it was not that the other snipers did not want to attack, but they could not attack the Ripper-winged insects at all. The Ripper-winged insects were too fast. With the reaction speed of the snipers, it was impossible for them to lock on to the Ripper-winged insect. David aimed the number 5 long-range sniper cannon in the direction of the wormhole. At that moment, a Ripper-winged insect flew out. Just as a group of Kaji was about to lure the Ripper-winged insect away, a level 1 sniper bullet hit the Ripper-winged insect's head. During this process, David used the shadow attendant's observation and found that the Ripper-winged insect would pause for less than a quarter of a second when it appeared from the wormhole. In a quarter of a second, to aim and lock on to the Ripper-winged insect that appeared from an unknown location in the 5 square meter space of the wormhole, the reaction speed required was unimaginable. Fortunately, at such a close distance, there was no need to calculate the wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity, and so on. As long as the bullet was aimed and fired, it would almost be shot in a straight line. This shot also shocked the Kaji. One Ripper-winged insect was enough to stall a group of Kaji. Even with the support of the rapid-fire anti-air cannons, it would still take a long time to kill it. Good marksmanship. Our team has such a strong sniper. Lieutenant Elmer's eyes lit up as he praised loudly. At a time like this, with the help of a strong sniper, the battle would become a lot simpler. Just as he was praising the sniper, another Ripper-winged insect flew out of the wormhole. At the same time, another level 1 bullet pierced through the Ripper-winged insect's head, killing it on the spot. This time, Lieutenant Elmer fell silent. This kind of marksmanship and reaction speed meant that this sniper was definitely a true sniper Kaji. However, snipers of Kaji were extremely rare. Most of the snipers of Kaji were sent to the vicinity of Warstar, making it even more difficult to see a sniper Kaji on other planet. The number of snipers of Kaji on planet Monolith was extremely limited. At this time, David switched over to the control system of the number 7 sniper cannon. His fingers quickly entered a number of keys, and then he used the shadow attendant to aim and wait for a new ripper-winged insect to appear. He knew in his heart that after 3 consecutive shots, he would need to wait 15 seconds for the sniper cannon to appear. Otherwise, in this kind of war, if the sniper cannon malfunctioned, he wouldn't even be able to protect himself, let alone fight. Chapter 92. This was the 3rd ripper-winged insect that David had killed. The next attack would take 10 seconds, and the ripper-winged insects were still pouring out of the wormhole. "Thank you for your help, brother. I have opened a direct communication channel for you. We will do our best to coordinate with your attacks," Lieutenant Elmer said to David through a separate channel as he opened the channel for David. Hearing Lieutenant Elmer call him brother, David could not help but feel embarrassed. This was the father of his good friend, Daly. "Uncle, I am David, Daly's friend. I will listen to your orders," David quickly replied through the open channel. "David." Lieutenant Elmer was stunned. He quickly recalled who David was. There was only one person with such sniping ability and the name David. "David, we did not expect an insectoid invasion. It is our mistake to let a student like you take part in the war," Lieutenant Elmer said in a deep voice. As a soldier of the Federation, it was not right for a high school student, a minor, to take part in a war like this. "Uncle, I am deeply honored to be able to help you. I will be able to attack 3 times in 5 seconds," David softly reminded as he looked at the time. At that moment, 2 more ripper-winged insects flew out of the wormhole, but they were both stopped by Kaji. Lieutenant Elmer did not continue the conversation. This was not the time to chat. The help that David could provide now was exactly what they needed. Currently, only ripper-winged insects were coming out of the wormhole. Although they were difficult to deal with, Kaji and the others could still handle them with the help of the city defense system. However, if there were too many ripper-winged insects, the situation on the city wall would become critical. David's sniping ability was the fatal counter to these ripper-winged insects with weak defense. 5 seconds later, 2 more ripper-winged insects flew out of the wormhole. David could also see that the longer the wormhole existed, the faster the insectoids were passing through it. First Lieutenant Elmer turned to Kaji, who was wielding a Grade 2 heavy axe, and ordered, "Gerard, you go and help clean up the flying insects." Including First Lieutenant Elmer, the 5 Kaji who had Rank 2 weapons were all heavy assault weapons. 3 of them were Rank 2 heavy axes and 2 were Rank 2 warhammers. These were specially prepared by the army to deal with Rank 2 insectoid. Every Kaji who possessed a Grade 2 weapon were the elites of the entire Kaji squadron. With a flash, Kaji Gerard rushed into the battle circle of a group of Kaji warriors. Due to frequent training, Kaji Gerard's intervention did not cause chaos in this group of Kaji. Instead, they cooperated with him with experience. Shield Kaji and Warhammer Kaji squadrons' continuous attacks limited the ripper-winged insect's space of movement. Kaji Gerard swung his Grade 2 heavy axe at the most opportune moment and split the ripper-winged insect's head open. After killing the ripper-winged insect, Kaji Gerard did not stop and rushed into another group of Kaji squadrons. At the same time, the number 5 long-range sniper cannon was reactivated. David Gerard fired the number 5 long-range sniper cannon again and blew up the head of a ripper-winged insect that had just appeared. He quickly switched to the number 6 long-range sniper cannon and blew up the head of a new ripper-winged insect. He then switched to the number 7 long-range sniper cannon and fired again. In less than 5 seconds, 3 Ripper-winged insects were killed. Due to David Gerard's intervention, although Ripper-winged insects kept pouring out of the wormhole, a miraculous balance was maintained on this section of the wall. Unknowingly, David Gerard had killed more than 30 Ripper-winged insects. This was almost a quarter of the total number of Kaji squadrons killed. The floor of the wall was covered in sticky green bug tribe blood. The Ripper-winged insects' corpses reeked of blood, and the foul stench of the bug tribe mixed with the smell of gunpowder. The entire section of the wall was like a shuraba. In less than 5 minutes of battle, 10 Kaji squadrons were killed. Even with the protection of the exoskeleton armor with strong defensive capabilities, the Ripper-winged insects' front limbs could not completely protect their bodies. The Ripper-winged insects' attack was just like its name. As long as the Kaji squadrons were hit, they would be severely injured. Among the 10 Kaji squadrons that were killed, 3 Kaji squadrons were hit in the neck and torso and died on the spot. 4 other Kaji squadrons had their arms or legs torn off, while the remaining 3 Kaji squadrons were severely injured. Dozens of medics in white rushed out of the tunnel. They were not afraid of the Ripper-winged insects at all. A medic was casually swept by a Ripper-winged insect while he was running. His fragile body was cut in half. In a battle of this level, normal soldiers without exoskeleton armor were a bunch of defenseless lambs. However, the responsibility of the medics made them ignore the danger. The Kaji squadrons also consciously tried their best to hold the Ripper-winged insects back so that they could not get close to the medic. The medics quickly came to the Kaji squadron's side. Although the exoskeleton armor had automatic healing liquid, these Kaji squadrons would not be able to last long if their huge wounds were not treated. Another Ripper-winged insect rushed out of the Kaji squadron's encirclement and rushed to the side of the medic. Immediately, 5 of them were killed. Protect the medics. Don't let those damn insects get close to them. They're saving our lives. Lieutenant Elmer shouted as he cut down the Ripper-winged insect with his axe. Although David saw the battle through the vision of the shadow attendant, he did not have time to think about it. He was in the middle of a new round of sniping. 32-33. He muttered to himself. Although the sniping system automatically recorded his results, he still liked to count them himself. The sense of accomplishment made him very proud. From the knowledge he received in the illusion, he knew that every level 1 insectoid was an extremely powerful lifeform. The battle between the Kaji squadrons and the Ripper-winged insects showed how terrifying level 1 insectoids were. With the help of the rapid-fire anti-air cannons, the cooperation of the 5 Kaji squadrons, and the occasional help from Kaji squadrons with a level 2 weapon, the Ripper-winged insects still paid a heavy price despite having such a huge advantage. However, such powerful creatures were killed by his long-range sniper cannon every single time. This was what a real sniper was like. Just as he switched to the number 7 long-range sniper cannon and was about to count to 44, something unexpected happened. After 5 minutes of battle, his sniping had almost become an instinct. When the shadow attendant sensed the slight change in the wormhole's energy, he knew in advance that a Ripper-winged insect was about to appear. In this short period of time, he switched to the long-range sniper cannon and aimed. As soon as the Ripper-winged insect appeared, he would adjust his aiming field of vision and shoot its head off. This time, the shadow attendant sensed a strong energy fluctuation from the wormhole. David did not hesitate and immediately aimed the number 7 long-range sniper cannon in the direction of the energy fluctuation. However, the insectoid that appeared next was different from what he had imagined. The 5-meter-wide wormhole was squeezed by this insectoid as if it was squeezing through. It had a gigantic body that was 4 meters tall and 7 meters long. It had 6 legs and 2 thicker forelimbs. The forelimbs were claws made of 3 spikes. The gigantic insectoid's entire body was grayish-white. The surface of its shell was uneven, showing that it was extremely thick. Although the appearance of the insectoid surprised David, he still instinctively fired. The number 7 long-range sniper cannon's number 1 Grade 1 bullet, that flew out directly hit the center of the gigantic insectoid's head as soon as it appeared while its body was still stiff from passing through the wormhole. David was highly focused. Through the shadow attendant's field of vision, he saw something that shocked him. The bullet that was fired from the long-range sniper cannon had a terrifying impact and a number 1 Grade 1 bullet's terrifying penetrative power. After it hit the gigantic insectoid's head, the super-strong impact caused the gigantic insectoid's head to tilt backward. When the gigantic insectoid's head recovered, the No. 1 Grade 1 bullet turned into a thin, flat piece of metal and fell from its head. This was a number 1 Grade 1 bullet. It was made of the same material as most of Kaji's number 1 Grade 1 weapons. Due to the huge body of the long-range sniper cannon, the number 1 Grade 1 bullet's kinetic energy had reached an unimaginable level. However, such a number 1 Grade 1 bullet could not break through the gigantic insectoid's defense that had just appeared. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.